Okay, with that, I'd like to call the meeting to order. This is a special meeting of the Harbor Commission. Can I have a roll call, please?
All right, and I'll take everybody as I usually do in the order I see you on my screen. Commissioner Carlson?
Here.
Commissioner Callahan?
Here.
Commissioner Walters?
Here.
Commissioner Kilroy?
Here.
Commissioner Bauer?
Present.
Commissioner Krazan? And we didn't.
Leslie, you're muted.
You're muted, so we didn't hear it, but I think we know you're here.
Sorry, here.
That's okay. All right, here. All right, there you go.
Okay, with that, salute to the flag. Matt, would you mind leading us in the salute to the flag?
Certainly. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Commissioner Kilroy. Can I hear a motion to approve the order of the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, can we, any discussion on that? I don't see any hands raised, so can we have a roll call vote?
Commissioner Carlson?
Approved.
Commissioner Callahan?
Approve.
Commissioner Walters?
Approved.
Commissioner Kilroy?
Approved.
Commissioner Bauer?
Approved.
And Commissioner Krazan?
Approved.
You forgot the chair.
Oh, and I'm sorry, and Chair Light.
Freudian.
Did I forget to call your name at the beginning of roll call too?
I concur.
Okay. I skipped you at the top and I forgot to go back. I apologize.
Okay, with that, we'll move to the blue folder items. The only blue folder item I saw was the article and comments related to the J1 agenda item. So what do we do with that? Do we discuss it now or do we just hold it for J1?
You hold it for J1. You can have a motion to receive and file the blue folder items, and then they're just considered as you consider J1.
Yeah. Motion to receive and file Joe Farlow's submission.
Second.
And there should be, just to be clear, in the blue folder, and I just want to make sure everyone has it. So there's a submission that was made. It was an email from Mark Hansen, but it was a forwarding of a comment from Mr. Joe Farlow. And then 2 pages down, there's another comment. There's another blue folder item from a gentleman named Mike Kouffer, Couffer, and that has a California Fish and Wildlife Journal article attached to it, as well as some other correspondence. So that's everything that should have been in that link for the blue folder from you. So just want to make sure that, by I think we could just make the motion to receive the entire blue folder, but I just want to make sure that's what you all received.
Okay.
So for me, it's all mashed together in one.
It is. It just comes as one long file, unfortunately. Yeah. So there's really 2 items from 2.
Shall I amend my motion?
If you would, I wouldn't appreciate it.
Motion to approve the items in the blue folder.
Great. Commissioner Carlson.
You're on mute.
Approved.
Commissioner Callahan.
Approved.
Commissioner Walters.
Approved.
Commissioner Kilroy.
Approved.
Commissioner Bauer.
Approved.
Commissioner Krazan.
Approved.
Chair Light.
Approved. Okay, with that, we move to the consent calendar. The only thing on there is the approval of the affidavit of posting. Can we have a motion to approve the consent calendar?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, before we take a vote, any public comment?
We have no one waiting to comment on that item.
Okay.
Commissioner Carlson.
Approved. Yes.
Commissioner Callahan.
Approved.
Commissioner Walters.
Approved.
Commissioner Kilroy.
Approved.
Commissioner Bauer.
Approved.
Commissioner Krazan.
Approved.
Chair Light.
Approved. So what I don't see on here is, normally we have public testimony on non-agenda items, or because this is a special meeting, we don't have that?
It's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. Okay, so I'm hearing it was removed because it's a special meeting.
It's a special meeting. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I was unaware of that.
Okay,
Okay, so item G, there's no excluded consent calendar items, so we move to I. Items continued from previous agendas, nothing there. J, items to discuss prior to action, and that takes us to J1.
great. Well, you all know that we called this special meeting this evening to talk about the dredging program within King Harbor. The dredging really happens as a result of the fact that we get a lot of migration of sand from north to south. Water is a porous structure, and that sand migrates through the breakwater and deposits itself inside the harbor has been dredged. The two most recent dredgings occurred in 2005 and 1988. Those are the two previous ones. And I'm going to put up, I should have done this already, a PowerPoint presentation here. So I will share my screen with you. This is the technology at work here. Okay, share screen. Here we go. There's one. Oh my. Let's see. How do I do this? Why am I being challenged right at the moment here? There we go. Okay. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Yep.
Great. Okay. So here's where I should have started. So as I mentioned, we do have this identified need to conduct dredging due to the shoaling that is occurring along the breakwater and the jetty due to the migration of sand that makes its way into the harbor. This is a project that started down the capital improvement path in 2017 when the project was added by the city council to the capital improvement plan. And it's been approved by the city council every year since then as part of their approval of our capital improvement budget. City council did approve a design contract in 2018 to move the process forward. And the most recent action by the city council was the approval of a budget response report as part of their 2020-2021 budget adoption process, which was really a status update on where we are in the dredging program itself. Our original intent related to the dredging was to try to coordinate the dredging effort with a repair project that the Army Corps of Engineers is slowly working through their system, which is a repair project to address some of the scalloping and deterioration of the breakwater. We had been working with them and meeting with them because part of the repair work on the breakwater requires potentially some kind of an access channel to be created in the harbor immediately adjacent to that breakwater to allow them to have access to it. And so our goal was to try to coordinate this dredging operation and project with that Corps of Engineers project. Eventually, the Corps' timing is a little bit slower. All of a sudden, uncertainty was created about exactly when they were going to move forward with those breakwater repairs. It's still something that's on their plate, but I can tell you it's moving very slowly through their process. And so given the pace of that, the city decided to move forward with the dredging project on our own. And we've done a fair amount of work since this process has started. It requires, as a first step for the city to do a fair amount of work, including biological resource surveys. It requires us to prepare a sampling analysis plan, a sediment characterization study. That work's all been completed, and we presented that work to a group called the DMMT, which is really the group that is comprised of a bunch of other agencies, kind of an alphabet soup of state and federal agencies that are all agencies that have a role in the placement of the material. We went through 2 rounds of meetings with that group, and I'm going to introduce Kimberly here in a minute from Wood, who's going to take you through the rest of this PowerPoint presentation, so I won't steal her thunder, but we did present that information at a couple of their meetings, and ultimately that was approved, which really started the permitting process, which led to the Army Corps of Engineers issuing that notice of public comment that initially came up for you a couple of weeks ago as part of my director's report. So I think with that is just by way of a short background on how we got to where we are, what I'd like to do. And, oh, good, let's see, we're gonna have to I gotta figure out how to do this. Hold on 1 second. How do I don't have to turn Kimberly's mic on. She can do it herself. So Kimberly, you can turn your camera and your mic on, and I think you can take over the PowerPoint presentation from here. We'll see how this goes.
Okay, great. I'm not sure if I will be able to. Okay, perfect. You can navigate for me. Okay, so I'm Kimberly Gavi. Thank you for the introduction, and I'm happy to see you guys here tonight. I do work for Wood, and I did do the sediment sampling and characterization study for the King Harbor Maintenance Dredging Project. As Stephen mentioned, the sediment characterization study focused entirely on dredging for navigation within King Harbor, and it was also designed to help the city and the Corps get the breakwater repaired, as he discussed. The dredge areas for the project were limited to 2 locations that are outlined in yellow on the figure to the right. These areas were called the Outer Harbor, which is proposed to be dredged to minus 18 feet mean lower low water and will remove up to 60,000 cubic yards of dredge material to the design depth and the overdredge, and then the Basin 3 entrance channel, which would be dredged to minus 15 feet mean lower low water and remove approximately 2,000 cubic yards of material. So these dredge areas are actually outlined in yellow on the figure. The breakwater, as you know, is the northern location, and the Basin 3 area is the southern. So the proposed placement for the project was beneficial reuse at either one location within the harbor, which is outlined in blue. It was called the in-harbor placement area, and it has a capacity of 29,000 cubic yards. And the second location that was proposed was the outer harbor placement site to the south of the King Harbor entrance, and that contains a capacity of 116,000 cubic yards. So the process for large Southern California dredging projects requires a lot of regulatory scrutiny. Individual permits are applied for to various agencies in order to get the job done. Each project requires a biological resource survey, the preparation of the SAP that we did for the project, and also a pretty stringent sediment characterization study. So you can go to the next, oh no, this is right, sorry, the right side. So the SAP for the study was presented to the DMMT on July 24th and approved on August 9th. The sampling was performed in October 2019, and the SAP report was prepared and presented the sediment testing results on March 25th to a large group of regulators, including the Corps, the EPA, the California Coastal Commission, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the California Fish and Wildlife Service, the Los Angeles Regional Water Quality Control Board, and NOAA. And the purpose of this presentation initially was to allow the agencies to review all of the results and provide comments so that the city could apply for their permits. And then after receiving their comments, the responses were presented to the same agencies on May 27th, and their proposed placement options were approved. And then this opened the pathway for the city to apply and perform the work, and this also led to that USACE public notice that is currently open for comment until October 29th. So the rest of the presentation is going to go over the project study and results and the subsequent agency comments. So as previously mentioned, the Outer Harbor dredging site was identified in an attempt to coordinate with the Army Corps to repair the breakwall at the same time. And at this site, we collected 12 sampling locations using a vibrocore, and they were combined in sets of 3 based on their proximity to each other to create 4 composite samples for analytical chemistry testing. And then the next slide shows the second dredge area that was identified as needed for safe navigation, and this is Basin 3. For the Basin 3 dredge area, 3 samples were collected and combined to form 1 composite for analytical chemistry testing. And other locations within the harbor weren't proposed because this was a navigation-focused study. Additional dredging can be performed under the City of Newport's maintenance dredging permit, that encompasses small dredging projects in a more streamlined and cheaper fashion. But because we wanted to really focus on getting these areas open and accessible to the residents at King Harbor and to people coming in to use it, these were the focus. So then there was 2 options proposed for placement. So this is a picture of the in-harbor placement area. And this is a location where a depression was identified using bathymetry surveys. This area was chosen because of its proximity to the dredge footprint, which would save cost for disposal. However, its capacity was not large enough for all of the proposed dredge materials. So 5 grab samples were collected at this site and composited for analytical chemistry in comparison to the dredge site. The second placement location is the outer harbor placement. And because of capacity limitations within the in-harbor location, this second area was proposed with its 116,000 cubic yards of capacity. And this area has been used for sand placement and as a sand source for several Southern California dredging and beach nourishment projects, and is known as a borrow site. This area and others like it along the coast of Southern California have been studied since the early 1900s. This particular site was first used for a large South Redondo Beach replenishment project in 1968 to 1969 that placed 1.4 million cubic yards of sand on the beach, which widened it to 250 feet. And it has experienced more than 50 years of stability in that after that replenishment was done. So on the next slide, the DMT guidelines required a standard list of chemicals to be evaluated for all of the sediments proposed for dredging. These are common chemicals of concern in marine environments. So for this project, we tested 5 composite samples for these chemicals from the proposed dredged areas and 1 from each placement site. For the proposed dredge areas, vibrocore samples were collected, and a vibrocore is designed to characterize the full extent of sediment to be dredged, while a grab sample, which were collected at the placement site, is designed to just show what's going on at the seafloor surface. And the reason cores are collected is so that you can get a good idea of everything that you might be disposing of a location, whereas you only are concerned with compatibility for the placement location, so you don't have to collect deeper sediments. And for this project, we also collected a lot of geotechnical samples and tested them for physical properties. And the reason was because during prior dredging studies at this site, there was some rock debris found in the dredge sediments, and we wanted to see if we could identify where it may be within our proposed dredge areas for better project planning. So the results of our grain size analysis showed that the dredge materials were really sandy. This is very interesting to the agencies because the sandy materials are best for beach placement, and they are very interested in reusing this type of material as often as possible. The criteria for beach placement is greater than 80% sand, and if you look at our sampling locations here in the table on the bottom of the slide here, they are all 80% or 89% or more sand. And at the placement sites, the outer harbor was also very sandy, 99%, but the in-harbor placement area was much finer with only 52% sand. Finer sediments have a tendency to be able to move around more with current movements because they are smaller and lighter and they are more easily suspended. So one of our hopes was that if we place the sandy material within the in-harbor site, it will prevent future scouring and enhance flushing and circulation within King Harbor. So on the next slide, the chemical results show that the majority of our sediments contain very low levels of chemical analytes relative to our sediment quality guidelines. The sediment quality guidelines we compare to for these studies are called effects range low, ERL, and effects range median, ERM. These 2 guidelines are not regulatory limits as much as screening levels used to determine when impacts to benthic communities are most likely seen and when they are least likely are almost never seen. The guidelines were developed by evaluating many studies of the effects of contaminants on marine species. And for our sites, we determined that some contaminants that were seen in sediments at both the dredging site and at the in-harbor placement site. In particular, pesticides like DDTs, which are very common in coastal areas and are even measured in sediments collected at the ocean disposal reference sites far offshore, were measured at slightly elevated levels. DDTs and other pesticides are and have been commonly used for many years. Sources of DDTs and other pesticides are widespread and are in everything from your camping bug repellent to weed killers that you use for your landscaping. The other analyte identified at a level above ERL was PCBs. PCBs are another widespread contaminant that is found in materials such as paint and transformers. This chemical is considered a legacy contaminant that exists in the environment today, mostly due to historical and not current uses. Our sample testing results showed that both DDTs and PCBs in the sediments in the outer harbor and in Basin 3 sites, as well as in the in-harbor placement site. But the samples in the outer harbor were limited to only OHC and OHD composites, which are located toward the south part of the breakwater. Because of this, it was proposed to place sediments with these elevated analytes with like sediments within the harbor so that they were not placed in the outer harbor and in the borrow site to be used for future beach nourishment. We also saw elevated levels of arsenic, but arsenic naturally occurs in California soils and is not considered to be of concern for this study. So in summary, the SAP conclusions that we presented to the DMMT in March were that all of the proposed dredge materials meet grain size compatibility requirements for nearshore placement, with the majority of the samples with 80% or more sand, and that the sediments for the dredge materials meet compatibility requirements for the outer harbor placement site, but not necessarily the in-harbor placement site. And that's because those in-harbor placement sediments, or in-harbor sediments, were much finer than our dredge materials. And then the sediment chemistry showed that no chemicals were elevated above the effects range median in the outer harbor placement site or in the OHA, OHB, or OHD dredge areas. And some of the elevated levels of both pesticide and PCB congeners above the ERL at the IH placement site were similar to the OHC and OHD dredge areas. And all of the samples other than arsenic were below the RSL guideline values. And that's not of concern because it's common in Southern California soils. So when we presented these results to the agencies, they inquired about the beneficial reuse of sediments within the harbor. As discussed, the depression in the harbor was seen as an opportunistic placement site that could be utilized for cost savings initially, but then was also identified as an area where the surface sediments were fine-grained and contained slightly elevated levels of chemicals. It was determined that placement of the dredge materials at this site may cap the fine sediment sink within the harbor and allow for better flushing and circulation of harbor waters. The second thing that the agencies was concerned about was actually that they wanted to make sure that we were optimizing the beneficial reuse. So on the next slide, sorry, I lost my place. There we go. So they were just like, the sediment is so nice and sandy. Why are you going to put it in this borrow site? Why won't you place it just directly on the beach? And this was a major question and concern by the California Coastal Commission. They were not concerned with the chemical levels as much as the sand going to waste, actually. So there were several reasons why the placement at the borrow site was proposed instead of beach placement, because the width of Redondo Beach is currently adequate to provide protection to the nearby structure. There's no impact to shoreline stability. There's no highly erosive areas that have been identified. There's no immediate need for placement at nearby beaches. So the widths of the South Redondo Beach are 130 to 170 feet, which is compared to the 250 feet that were there in the past, is very stable. They haven't actually moved a whole lot. Direct placement of smaller quantities of sand at the South Redondo Beach reach have been a little bit less successful compared to these larger volumes, so it seems that a larger beach replenishment project would be more beneficial. And then sand dredge from King Harbor may contain some stone intermixed with shoal material, which was identified during the last study of this site and dredging event. So placement at the borrow site would allow for more effective screening prior to direct beach placement, allow us to remove the debris before it ever goes anywhere else and find another place for it, potentially. And sediment with debris could be transported to the Redondo Submarine Canyon and ecologically sensitive areas. So we want to screen it first before we put it there, which is a great opportunity with the borrow site. So the other thing that the agencies were concerned about was the biological resources related to the Redondo Submarine Canyon. In particular, impacts to juvenile sea bass were mentioned by NOAA. Some literature reviews show that the nursery habitat is about 3/4 of a mile from the borrow site, and the borrow site is a great placement option again because it will allow the city to develop a debris management plan that will help limit or eradicate impacts to sensitive species by allowing the dredge material to be screened for stones, trash, and other debris that could affect these species. The debris management plan will include best management practices to reduce ecological impacts and will be determined in consultation with the agencies, mostly with the Regional Water Quality Control Board. In addition, the biological resources evaluation prepared by the Chambers Group for the study corroborated that there would be no impact to sensitive species by placing the material at either of the proposed locations. So in summary, the placement options proposed in July 2019 were accepted by the DMMT in August and evaluated according to the approved SAP. There's a need for dredging at King Harbor, but no need for sand placement at the nearby reach segments of Redondo Reach. And the Outer Harbor Placement Area borrow site has been extensively studied, approved, and used by the Army Corps and LA County for this purpose for many years. And dredge sediment placement at the borrow site reserves material for large projects that would likely be more successful and result in less interruption to the public compared to multiple smaller projects, allows for better screening of material for stones and other debris prior to direct beach placement, and also allows for additional considerations to sensitive biological and ecological areas such as the Redondo Submarine Canyon. And any questions?
I'm going to unshare my screen unless we want to come back to it, which we may want to. So let me stop sharing. Thank you, Kimberly. So as you can see, Kimberly's firm Wood was the ones that actually put a lot of that material together, and she's very familiar with the dredging project and particularly the sediment analysis that was done in support of the project. On your screen, you see a lot of other names. So I just want to make sure you are aware who's with us. And if you have particular questions, they are available to answer them for you. The first is our city engineer, Andy Wingy. He's on the line. Geraldine Trevetti, who works in our public works department and is also an engineer that works with Andrew on the project. Antonio Gardea, who's a senior planner here at the city, who can help us if we have any questions regarding the regulatory and permitting process. Ron Noble. Noble Consultants is a name you're familiar with. They've been the city's marine engineer for quite a while. You all, or many of you who've been around here, know John Moore, who worked for Ron in Noble Engineers. I think Ron's been acquired by someone else whose name I won't remember right now. He'll probably tell you who that is if he has a chance. And then we also have Wen Kai Quinn, who's an associate and colleague of Ron's, who worked on the design of the dredging project as well. So you've got probably everybody who's been touching, working, eating, drinking, living this project here. So they're happy to tackle any questions that you might have about the dredging project. Any of them can jump on and activate their mic or camera if they believe they're the right person to tackle the question. So I'll turn it back to you, Chair Light, and let you take the meeting from here in terms of how you'd like to tackle it.
Okay, so I think, what I'd like to do first is I've got some questions and we'll open up to the other commissioners. And then once the commissioners are done asking their questions, we'll open it up to the public. My first question is for you, Director Proud, is what are our options as we're considering this? I mean, there's nothing we turn back to the city, so it would be concerns or comments to the Corps of Engineers, correct?
Correct. So, we called this meeting in part because the Army Corps, the city has submitted the application to the Army Corps of Engineers, and that application packet was included as part of your materials for this meeting. The Army Corps of Engineers has opened the comment period for comments on the project. It was the commission's desire to have this meeting to hear more about and ask questions of the city staff and consultant team related to the dredging project. And you have the option, if you so choose, to submit a letter to the Army Corps of Engineers, although I will preview that our recommendation would be, given where we are in the application process, that unless you feel very strongly about submitting the comment letter or have a particular concern that you feel we haven't taken into consideration in the process thus far, that you take this information, you receive and file it. There are still steps to occur in the process yet to come, but we have gone a long ways down the road in terms of having these meetings with the DMMT and getting the approval of the project as proposed and presenting the material. So you are certainly free. I don't want to constrain you. You're certainly free if you feel necessary to submit a letter to the Army Corps. But my recommendation would be, it should be a concern that you feel very strongly about, so that it doesn't kind of derail the process that's already underway, if you will. And there may be others who would speak on that. So I think the intent of calling the meeting was to hear the information, take it all in, and determine whether you did feel it was necessary to make a comment or not. So I think after you've been able to answer your questions to your satisfaction and heard from members of the public, you could make a determination at that point as to whether you believe the commission should be submitting some kind of a comment to the Army Corps in response to the application.
Well, I do, but I don't want to be intimidated by the advice not to do anything, because this is the first we're seeing it. I would have preferred we got to opine on it before it went to the Corps of Engineers, and then we could fix things.
Yeah, understood. And if there's, and I will take the blame for us kind of moving down the process of getting the application submitted. There's no real good answer to it, other than it's just something that kind of got biased in the middle of everything that's been going on in the intervening months. So I think it would have been appropriate for you to see it before it went to the Army Corps as well, and I take responsibility for that not happening. So, and if you feel like you want to make a comment, you certainly are free to do that. So, we can do that. But I think I would have the conversation and then decide whether you think that's a necessary step or not.
So that gets to my first thing. The biggest question hanging in my mind is, why aren't we looking at the hand launch boat ramp? That thing is dry, and the boat ramp is sitting on dirt, on the sand, for a large percentage of the time. And if there's waves in the harbor, they bang against that, and it damages the float. So, what's our options with respect to that? Dredging the hand launch boat ramp, is that foregone conclusion? We can't do that now, or?
For us, and if any of the consultant team or folks want to jump in on this, you can. But given where we are in the application process, since that wasn't included as part of our original scope of work, I don't feel, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but the group doesn't feel like that's something we would want to necessarily amend our application at this point to that scope of work. What we have talked about, and I think Ron Noble's probably the person who can give a little more insight on this, is doing a separate low volume maintenance permit with the Corps, which would allow us actually, and we kind of like this strategy, because it would actually allow us, instead of it rolling the hand launch in and only being able to dredge it when we have these big dredging operations every 15 or 16 years, kind of a low volume maintenance permit would allow us to get into some of these much smaller areas and deal with them perhaps more frequently and keep them open and available to the public. That's something that's been used in other locations. I know Ron has some familiarity with it in one particular location, so he may be able to kick his mic and camera on and give you a little bit of background on that. But that's our thinking, is some of the corners of the basin, the hand launch area, places where we do get some deposition of material, that we could address that under a separate process, and we would structure that process to allow us to address that on a more regular basis. And Ron,
it just seems that while you've got the activation costs are a big cost in something like this, and it seems like at least that location, which is right between the two locations we'll be dredging, would be more cost effective to take advantage of the equipment that will be in the harbor at the time, and the staff that will be in the harbor at the time.
I mean, I'm sure there's probably some cost savings in terms of the mobilization of the equipment and material to deal with that at this point. This project started out, as I mentioned, kind of as an Army Corps process, and we were working with them, and it was really focused much more, I think, as Kimberly noted, on navigation operations as opposed to the hand launch facility. So it just wasn't included in this particular scope of work. So it would either have to be an amendment to this particular application and process, or as I mentioned, we could tackle it as a separate application process and take care of it as a separate project under a different permit for maintenance. And Ron, I see you're now up on the screen, so maybe you want to talk about.
I thought I could add a couple of comments. So,
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you, sir.
and as you mentioned, Steve, of course, this project's been in the works for some period of time, and these other pocket areas were discussed initially, and it was decided at one point it was thought to tie in with the Corps of Engineers project having to do with the breakwater. So at that point, the project, the dredging, maintenance dredging project, centered around more deep water navigation coming into the main entrance and then that one basin. So at that time, the dredge project went in that direction. But as Stephen mentioned, the city of Newport Beach for many years has a what's called just a maintenance dredge permit. And it's a small volume. I think it's 5,000 or less cubic yards anywhere within the harbor, because they have a lot of boat docks individually that from time to time need dredging. So this permit, which they have to renew, I think maybe on a 5-year basis, if I'm not mistaken, but they easily get it renewed by meeting the criteria of the Corps. It allows them to come in and do these more simplified dredging projects with low volume. Also, as far as mobilization of equipment, it is true when equipment's there that it's nice from that aspect, but usually these small, very small volumes of equipment are handled by the very small dredging companies that just mobilize quickly, and they can do it effectively and cost efficiently. So that was the main reasoning. It started out trying to tie in with the Corps, but the Corps takes an extremely long time to initiate their own projects. So at that point, we were up and running. As you heard from Kimberly, Wood had already done all the sediment sampling, and so it didn't seem appropriate to sit around and wait a couple of years, and so we went ahead. To amend the project now, or the permit at this point, because it's been submitted also to the Regional Water Quality Control Board that will put it out for public comment a little later, would stop the entire project, because we'd have to go back, we'd have to rewrite the entire project description. We might have to do more sediment sampling, but it would have to then go back through the agencies. So at this point, at least it's my recommendation that we go ahead with the project as stated for the navigational purposes, and that these small areas then can be addressed at whatever time by looking into this maintenance dredging as City of Newport Beach has.
Great, thanks, Ron.
I understand the recommendation. It's just frustrating. I mean, it just seems the city's forcing our hand here. And, you know, it's something we've been talking about on this commission since I was on board. I'm sure it's before that. And it just, I feel like we're being railroaded here. And whether it's intentional or not, that's certainly what's, you know, the result is if we wanted to get that dredged and we had concerns with it, now we're bad people because we're delaying the whole project. And I just don't like being put in that position where this could have been much more integrated and I think vetted out without this risk that we're now exposing this late in the process. And I hear you that there's time later, but the later we go, you know, the worse the impact is going to be on this, because we'll have more water under the bridge. So I kind of feel like it's a fait accompli unless we upset the apple cart. So I don't like being put in that position as a commission, but it is what it is. So we'll move on from there. I'd like to go to Kimberly, if we could get her back online. You kind of said the source of the DDT and the PCBs and the arsenic. So you explained all that. Is this similar to the amounts that we saw in our previous dredgings, or is there a change in the content?
The sediment testing results are actually very similar to prior studies. The chemistry is a little bit different. I think it's slightly more elevated in comparison, but the grain size, content, and everything was very similar.
So so if we quit DDT, why would it be elevated? And PCBs, why would they be elevated?
Well, it would potentially be from stormwater sources, primarily, I would imagine, runoff from the watershed. You can have either different inputs coming in that way or just general water circulation movements. I know that it was mentioned that some of the sand may be coming through the breakwater, so it could be coming from other sources and locations. But it's primarily the DDTs in particular are probably a watershed source.
But so DDT is outlawed now, right?
It is, to an extent, you can still get, bug repellent with DEET, and it's a derivative of DDT. Another pesticide that's an emerging contaminant of concern are pyrethroids, that we also test for those as well, but there's no screening criteria. But DDT is outlawed, but it is still common in legacy contaminants still coming into our sediments and our watersheds, unfortunately. Okay, and I think, I would think that the finer sands, or whatever you want to call them, the finer sediment, is due to the, I sense that we're shoaling next to the break wall because stuff is filtering in, so you would expect the lighter stuff to make it all the way through. Is that
correct? So you think that the fine grains are coming through the breakwater more than the sand grains? Is that what you mean?
Well, I think the comment was you were surprised at the fineness of the sand that has been deposited in the harbor, and it would just seem the lighter stuff would filter through the break wall more frequently, more efficiently than heavy stuff, which with turbulence should drop out of the flow stream.
Yes, that's correct. I'm not sure if I know what the question is, but that statement is correct.
So I'm not sure why that's a surprising finding. If we dump in the harbor, my concern is that we increase shoaling when the waves come through the harbor mouth. Is that not a concern? We're already, I don't understand the mechanism how we shoal at the hand launch boat ramp and the Basin 3 when they're so far from the outside break wall. So I don't understand the shoaling mechanism there. Wouldn't putting more sand, raising the level in the harbor right at the harbor entrance, just open us up to more shoaling?
I don't think necessarily. So when we're putting a much heavier sand on top of the fine sand that's at the bottom of that depressed area. So, anything's possible, but I would be surprised that it would be a major concern on the sediments that we're going to be placing or plan to place on top.
Well, to what do you attribute the shoaling in Basin 3 and at the hand launch boat ramp then?
Well, since I haven't looked at that or studied that, I couldn't address that.
So it would seem that if we fill it, even if we fill it with heavier sediment, you may lock in the lighter sediment that's underneath there now, but those fine sediments are going to come back in and lay on top. And it would seem those would be easy to move into those areas that are already shoaling.
Well, except that when you look at the ebb and flow currents coming in the entrance, if the bottom is more or less flat, it's less likely for building up on that. It should then, by just a natural ebb and flood flow, the velocity of the currents, it's going to move fines around, no doubt about it, but those are going to move around anyway.
Yeah, so I'm not getting the story. So we put heavies on top, more fines come in. Seems like the fines are now shallower and there's going to be more water action that's going to increase the flow in that area. It would seem like we're going to move that lighter sediment more quickly than the current. It's kind of a sink right now.
Well, what I was trying to say was that there is a sink there, but if you fill the sink up and you have a heavier material on it, it's less likely for that heavier material to move, but you're still going to get fines moving in and out from outside the harbor with just the flood ebb conditions. So it's not going to remove any other fines that come in. It doesn't mean the fines are coming from that depressed area per se.
Okay. The next one in concern to the blue folder item, I don't know if y'all had the chance to read that, but they're saying the proximity to the sea bass nursery is like 360 feet rather than the 3/4 of a mile or whatever it is that's in the in your briefing. Can you address that at all, or have you seen that report?
I think Kimberly can, because we looked at that, and of course Chambers did a study on it, and I know that came up in the first DMMO meeting that we had, and then it was addressed by Kimberly in the second one where they accepted the project.
Correct. I haven't seen the blue folder, the 360 feet. I just know from the studies that we looked at, we found that the nursery habitat was at the head of the canyon, which is in relation to the edge of the borrow site was approximately 3/4 of a mile.
Okay, so you haven't seen it, so you can't address because it was a study, and apparently they think it's 360 feet away, not 3/4 of a mile.
And who stated that? Because I haven't seen this.
I don't have it up right in front of me. It was a.
Just to be a little more precise, what the sentence reads: the nursery site begins approximately 650 feet north of the placement area, not 3/4 of a mile away, as the consultant's biological technic report indicates. So there's the submitter of the blue folder item is asserting through that statement that the nursery site is 650 feet north, not 3/4 of a mile, as we reported in our technical documentation.
I know that came up by, similar question at the first DMMO by one of the agencies, by Fish and Game, I believe. But I believe also when we went back and talked to Chambers and verified and also talked to the Corps, that's where we get the 3/4 of a mile, that we didn't see the evidence that came up as far as the much closer location.
Yeah, so this is a study that appeared in the winter 2020 California Fish and Wildlife, and it's by Michael Kofer, and it shows the nursery sites for the different that they identified for the giant sea bass nursery, and it shows some called the orange phase right off the tip of the Topaz Jetty. And that's where I think they're getting that you're much closer than what you seem to show in your report. I think you're showing like the kind of the center of the head of the canyon, and this is showing that the nursery site actually extends to just offshore of the Topaz Jetty at its furthest south extension.
When you said winter 2020, I'm just curious when the report was released, what the date on it was, because it might not have been available when I was writing the report. I'd be happy to take a look at that.
It says 11-18-2020 for the article. I don't know when the study and analysis would have been completed. Oh, here it says. It said submitted 17 June 2019, accepted 23 September 2019.
Okay, I will have to look for that. I was not aware of it. I appreciate that. And I know that when we discussed this with the agencies, we also talked about some of our dredge plan incorporating the sand placement at the southern end of the site to be as far away from the canyon as possible. But again, this is a location that's been used for many, many years for this exact purpose. It's been studied and used by LA County and by the Army Corps. We definitely don't want to be impacting the fish, but the other thing about taking the time to put the sediment at the placement site is to put these BMPs into place, such as you could have anything from the regional board and related to not dropping enough sediment that you cause an overload of turbidity, screening the sediment for debris and other things that could affect the biological species in the area. Something extreme like a silt curtain, although that's not usually used for a placement site, that's more of a dredging BMP. But there's all kinds of things that can be done and put into our debris management plan to reduce the impacts.
Okay, and then this same study, well, and I agree with you, just because we've done it in the past, doesn't, it could have been a bad thing, doesn't mean we want to continue it. So prior precedent doesn't necessarily mean it's the right thing to do. They also talk about the breeding, the breeding time is between July 16th and December 31st. Is there, and I guess they're off by a month, have you looked at that time period or?
Yeah, so that was also one of the things that we discussed with the agencies was to avoid environmental windows, or I'm sorry, not avoid, but to be only perform the work within the environmental windows that are appropriate for the species that are nearby. And that was one of the things that came up with the regional board and they approved.
Okay. Thank you. That's all of my comments and questions. I'll open it up to the rest of the commission. I'm going to go in the order I see the hands here. I apologize. I didn't see the order. They actually popped up. So Commissioner Carlson.
Thanks. I have a lot of questions, but before I get to all of them, I just want to point out that the paper that you guys don't seem to know exists, I gave to the director, Proud, in one of these meetings early this year, and you clearly have not done much homework and research on this. And again, I echo Chairman Light's comments that this seems rushed and last minute, and to be told we can't comment on it now really angers me. And I look through this document and the inconsistencies in it, and I'm embarrassed that well, I'm angry as a taxpayer that I paid for this document, and I'm embarrassed that this goes to the public and the Army Corps with Redondo Beach's name on it. We can do better than this. Now, before I get to all my comments, Chairman Light, if you have any other questions regarding that paper, the author of that paper is online. He's one of our attendees. He will speak later. So if you have any other questions for the author regarding the study or the paper that our consultants haven't read, we can go to that. It's probably more appropriate to go to the public later, but he is available. I wanted you to know he's online.
Okay, thank you.
So some of my questions. We were just discussing sand going to the hand launch. The sand at the hand launch in the internal basin, the southern area, is very heavy, dense sand. Again, can you explain how putting very heavy, pure, 80 to 96% pure, heavy, dense sand in the middle of the harbor will be a good thing for those areas, or will it only migrate to the hand launch and to the southern channel? Question for anyone. Okay, no answer. Great, thanks. I'll pass it on to the Army. Next question. The northern breakwater.
Commissioner Carlson,
yes, sir.
Before you drop off that question, Ron is probably the person who understands the most about what we're proposing in terms of the placement of the. It sounds like you're asking the same question that Commissioner Light asked previously.
I'm specifically adding that we know there is heavy sand in the southern channel from the analysis. And I know that there is very heavy, dense beach quality sand in the hand launch area. It's not fines, it's not light stuff. It's very heavy stuff that's migrating to those areas. And we're proposing to put more heavy, dense, high quality beach-like sand in the center of that basin. How will that not just fill up faster?
Well, I didn't respond because like I said before, I haven't looked at the circulation pattern within the King Harbor for a long time. And I'm not aware of, I haven't looked it over at the hand launch where you're talking about that. So, I wouldn't want to speak to something that I personally don't have firsthand knowledge of. As far as the depression area, yes, I think I mentioned before, it's possible that there still could be movement of material there, but in my mind, it's less likely to move a heavier sand that's in a depressed area. If it was on the surface and it was in the normal flow pattern, it's one thing, but it was it's in a depressed area and it's heavier than the fines there, it's more likely to me that those heavy sands would protect further movement of the finer sands. That's what I was trying to say.
Okay, I appreciate that, but what you haven't seen that I think we do have is heavy sand is moving into an area in the northeast corner of that basin, which is essentially behind the southern channel, behind the northern navigation channel, behind the basin itself. And so, you know, again, heavy, dense sand is moving through those areas. Okay, another question. We're dredging two areas. We're dredging the northern area and the southern area. The southern area is definitely starting to impinge on a channel. Would we be doing the northern area if it wasn't for the breakwall project, since it's not impacting navigation?
Well, maybe the city can answer that more than myself. You know, when I got involved in this project, that area along the breakwater is definitely above the design channel depth. So that was the reason it was included. At the time, as you know, the Corps of Engineers had done a lot of repair work, and there was a possibility that there was contribution from that work as well. That's why my understanding was back then there was the thought of doing a combined dredging project and tying in with the Corps, but at the speed they were moving and the desire to have the main channel there down to your design depth, the project moved ahead. Otherwise, it could be more years waiting. Well, that's
what I would say, Commissioner Carlson, is the Army Corps project didn't drive our dredging project. So we have been getting questions about when are we going to dredge the harbor as long as I've been here, because people are seeing that shoaling built up. We're seeing people who are now treating that area as almost like a beach area out in the harbor. And there's been concern expressed that needed to be an area that was dredged. The Army Corps of Engineers just happened to be serendipitous that it was happening at the same time that we were giving consideration to the dredging project. So I want to be clear that we aren't dredging that area because the Corps was going to potentially do a breakwater project and we were just going to tag on to it. It was actually the reverse. We had been looking at that project as a dredge location. The Army Corps project came along, and in having conversations with them about what kinds of access they may need to be able to do the breakwater work, they indicated to us that they may need to create a access channel because it's too shallow there for them to get their equipment close to the breakwater. And we said, hey, great, we're thinking about dredging that area anyway because we're getting a lot of requests and we've had a lot of concern about how much material is building up there. Let's see if we can partner up on the project. So one isn't driving the other. It was really just almost a set of circumstances that came into being where we thought we could perhaps literally kind of kill two birds with one stone on this particular project. So unfortunately, as we've all said, the timing hasn't really synced up. We can move faster than they can move. And so we're just out ahead of them. What we are hopeful is if we ultimately do the dredging and that becomes a benefit to them when they do their breakwater project, the breakwater project still has some discussion to be had about does the city have any cost sharing obligations for that project. If a determination is made that we need to help share some of the costs of the breakwater repair, then our argument will be that some of the dredging we did should be considered an in-kind contribution to the breakwater project itself. So that's a little bit more color on kind of how we sort of got to where we are in the process.
Okay. So you mentioned two previous dredgings of the harbor. I only found one in the document, and it was a dredging of a small area in the northern basin, in one corner of the northern basin, and then that sand was placed in the northern basin. So somewhere I missed the second one. Has that northern area shoaled previously and been dredged previously anywhere in the history of the harbor?
You're talking about the area right along the break wall?
Yeah, the bad area, the beach area.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to see if I can point you to the document. I believe I'm going to have to scroll here. In the material that was submitted to the Army Corps, there was a map, I do believe, if memory serves, of an area that we did previously.
I saw one map. I only saw one map, and it showed the northern basin.
Yeah.
I may have missed a map of.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Channel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I think I see the map that you're looking at now.
Okay. Where I'm going is that northern channel area, the beach area, let's call it. Has it ever been dredged previously? Is it getting worse and worse over time? Is it building up faster? And where I'm going is, I believe it is. I believe, and my concern is that the northern breakwall area is really, really porous. I've seen it underwater. I couldn't get underwater in the last 2 weeks to take a picture of it. I'm really concerned that if we remove that sand, we lose the breakwall in that area, and then we have issues.
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit. Just we can verify, because we've looked at some aerial photography, that deposition is growing. So what you thought is actually the case. You can look at it in historical aerial photos, and you can see how that deposition in the northern portion is growing and expanding. At some point, it kind of drops off right where it gets to the area where the navigation in the main channel is, and we haven't, seen it progressing. So at some point, it may just be washing off and scouring out a little bit, and isn't impeding into the main channel as much as you might expect. As to the dredging perhaps affecting the stability of the breakwall, I'm going to have to refer back to the engineers to kind of tackle that question, because I won't be able to provide you a very good technical answer. But I just wanted to be clear that we've looked at it. We've seen it growing over time, as you have. And I think a lot of people have, which is what's led to us having this project up and before the council as part of our capital improvement program. So
I can
talk about
add
the
that
dredging and the stability of the breakwall.
I can, speak briefly to the stability of the breakwater. With the proposed dredging that's taking place, is going to have no impact on the stability of the breakwater. I mean, if it's taken it to the depth that it used to be at, and it's we're out a little ways from the actual where the toe of the rock comes down, and the Corps of Engineers from the design group, the planning and the design group of the Los Angeles district, support the project, and they're the ones that are behind the breakwater. So there's never been a question about the stability of the breakwater.
Okay. Can you answer a question for me about the total yardage? It seems like the total yardage is roughly 45,000 cubic yards. And then going the additional 2 feet of depth takes us to about 60,000 cubic yards. So that implies that extra, 2 feet overage is about 25% of the work, which sort of implies we only have, if 2 feet is 25%, then the whole problem must be, 6 feet. It seems like more than that in some areas. So, is it that we're working with kind of a pyramid here, and it's bigger at the base than at the top?
No, it's just that the area widens a little, as you'd expect going along that strip to take it another 2 feet down versus 2 feet higher. And it could be taken 2 feet higher, but typically when you're spending that kind of money to mobilize and dredge, you typically try to take advantage to some extent of overdepth. But that's again why there's a limit, that the overdepth cannot extend below that point. But it just gives some flexibility in there for both dredging and the contractor and, the economics. Yeah, no, I can certainly understand doing some overdepth.
what percentage of the total volume would you expect the overdepth to be?
Well, I think you just stated the numbers. We have the numbers in the report. We show the numbers for the to -16, and then we show with the additional 2 feet to -18, how that volume changes. I don't have those numbers in front of me, but you're right. With the 2 feet of overdepth, it went to 60,000 cubic yards along the breakwater section.
Okay. Let's see. One of the sections toward the end says, the permittee shall ensure that no debris is dispersed into the waters of the United States. How is that done? Because when the Marina del Rey breakwall was dredged, there was extensive debris, more than I would want in the ocean and more than I would want on our beaches. And
During the dredging operation, I assume you're talking?
I'm not sure what happened in the dredging operation when the Marina del Rey breakwall was cleared, but when the sand was deposited in the out-of-harbor storage site off Redondo Beach.
Okay, you're talking about the disposal of it, not the dredging of it.
A very poor job was done back then. How are we going to do any better?
Well, there's been a lot more effort put into containment curtains that end up in the plans and specifications that would go out to the contractor to bid. That they, depending on how it's specified, that they have to curtain off that area from the surface all the way down to the bottom for the circumference of the area that's being either dredged or disposal material in an in-harbor. Then the only thing I can say is we've been doing that on other projects here within the last year or two, and the techniques have improved drastically with how we're specifying containment curtains and what the contractor has to do to meet that.
What happens if they're not meeting it? Does the project stop? Do we have inspectors?
Oh, yes. That's the purpose. It would be inspected throughout, and typically, like in the last dredging project I did, it was routinely inspected as far as outside of the curtain area. And if the inspections came up with results of whatever was specified above a certain range, the dredging operation was shut down until it got corrected, because that's, again, in the specifications that the contractor is required to meet. So yes, he'd be shut down until it got corrected.
Okay. So one more question on DDT and chemicals. This area has a long and wonderful history of not doing anything with DDT in the ocean. And here we are doing something. We're going to move sand and filter it through the water column in the harbor and outside the harbor. I don't quite understand ERL and ERM. I don't know if those affect just, sand on the ground that I'm walking on, or DDT being put in the water that kids are playing in, or, is going into filter feeders and shellfish. There's writing in the document that people may harvest shellfish. People do harvest shellfish. Oysters and other shellfish are harvested from throughout the harbor. If you look at any rock on the breakwall, you'll find half-empty oyster shells, and people have taken those. So can you explain ERL and ERM and whether it just affects DDT in sand or DDT in sand being, filtered through water?
So ERL and ERM are sediment quality guidelines just for marine sediments. They're not used for water or for soils on land. The ERL and ERM are just guidelines. They're not regulatory driven. There's no actual EPA or rule or law that says that these are the line, but they are used to guide decisions related to the impact of a particular chemical, and they exist for many chemicals, not just DDTs, on a variety of species, more or less. So what's happened is there's been a literature review of a lot of studies of different chemicals, and these are the values that they determined are unlikely to have an effect or sometimes have an effect. So the low range is when it sometimes has an effect, and then the median range is when it's more likely to have an effect. And if it's below the ERL, it's considered to have no effect, or minimal, I should say. No would be a broad assumption.
Sure, but that's for undisturbed sediment.
No, well, disturbed and undisturbed sediments, any sediment in the marine environment.
Okay, but you're specifically proposing to use the water in that central basin and the water off Topaz Jetty as a filter for debris, larger rocks, and these chemicals before this sand is reused or placed on a beach.
I'm sorry, I didn't. Did you hear did you say the water in the?
Yes. So you'll be taking debris, rocks, and these chemicals out of this sand and dispersing it in the water column.
Oh, placing them in the water. I'm sorry.
Does that give you any pause?
So you can, we didn't actually look at water quality impacts, but you can test an elutriate sample to determine what the impacts to water quality of a placement of the materials might be. Typically with sand size particles, it's much less than smaller size particles. The only other thing I can comment on that is that, we did see sediment that already had these chemicals in the in-harbor sediment. So it's probably something that you might see in most places in the harbor. I can't say for sure because I haven't collected samples at those locations. As I mentioned, this is very commonly seen in many locations. It's not a good thing that we see it there, but it's just an unfortunate thing.
No, I get that. And I understand it comes from everywhere, and I understand it is everywhere. It's unfortunate that it seems to be still building up in the harbor. I understand it comes from runoff, but in the last, 10 or 15 years, the runoff going into the harbor has gotten better treatments. The first flush goes off to a treatment plant. You would think the quality would be getting better between less use of DDT. The amount of DDT still going into the ocean from my little 1 ounce jar of DEET is not what it was, from the Monsanto plant in Torrance. So you'd sort of hope it would be tapering off, and yet it doesn't seem to be, even though we're doing a better job of treating the water. If we're in so many projects and so many spills, including the big Monsanto spill, the decision was just leave the sand alone. We're not doing that here. We're picking the sand up and we're dumping it back in the water. And that's going to stir up all these chemicals and release them into the water column. During the extent of this project, during the duration of this project, do we have to tell stand-up paddleboarders, stay out of the water?
I'd have to run some more tests, I guess, to say specifically, but the amount that would go into the water column would probably not be at a level that would cause human health impact. So there's another type of risk assessment that you can do as a human health and ecological risk assessment. And we didn't do that for this study because it's not really required for dredge material evaluation. But also related to that, with the water quality best management practices that would hopefully be put into place for the placement of the site, it would help keep that sediment from creating that kind of a plume and diffusing into the water column. But I can't comment 100% for sure. But it's not really a level that I've seen that would be of concern to the agencies or other regulatory.
So you would feel fine during this project getting on a stand-up paddleboard, going across the harbor, falling in, and eating an oyster from the breakwall?
I feel like you're...
People are going to do that. No, people are going to do that.
I know, and I probably would, but I can't, it's not like I'm drinking or ingesting the water. As far as commenting on our exposure to DDTs every day, that's kind of, we're all exposed to them. Through tons, since birth, you've been exposed to DDTs, unfortunately, and I agree that it should be getting better. And these levels are unfortunate again, but not egregious in terms of, they're not above the ERM, for example. So they're more in the effects range load. I've seen projects that have them in the effects range median as well.
I can understand that where it is now, it's acceptable. And I can understand, where it is now, the sand off White's Point that Monsanto contaminated is fine. I'm just concerned about stirring it up, especially in the enclosed harbor with so much water access there and so many people playing in it. And then in the open ocean off a beach with, moms and kids and market squid, which I don't think are mentioned in the document. That's it. I have a longer list of comments that I'm going to submit to the Army Corps. And I guess my final question is to Director Proud. I share Chairman Slight's frustration at how this went forward. I knew we had done a dredging study, and I thought that was just to look at, where the sand might go. I had no idea there was a document, 45 pages long available, or I would like to have seen it. And I confess that 2 weeks ago, when this came up, I thought that this proposal was from the Army itself going out and doing the dredging we were hoping they would do. I did not realize 2 weeks ago that this document was from us, and that a document this extensive had been prepared by us and could have been shared with the commission this year, when we've had so many light meetings this year. We've even had meetings canceled this year for lack of things to talk about. And here we are now in the state of having to have an emergency meeting during a Dodger game I'd like to watch, to do something last minute. And this meeting is, already running longer than most of ours do. So my question is, if I comment to the Army, what does that mean? Do they go out and try to get answers to it? Do those comments just come back to you or to us? So is that just a circular comment? I think you're muted, sir.
I'm muted. Okay. So look, you are my comments at the beginning of the meeting. If you want to submit a comment as an individual to the Army Corps of Engineers, you're certainly free to do that. My comments were directed to you as a commission as to whether you want to submit the comment on your letterhead as a commission, city letterhead to the Army Corps. So, I understand that individuals are certainly free to comment on anything they wish to comment on. That comment was really directed to the commission as a whole. As to what the Army Corps does with those comments, I'm going to ask somebody who's a little more familiar with this process than I am as to what the Corps does. I don't know whether they come back to us to be addressed, whether the Corps packaged them up in kind of their comments. So maybe someone who's a little more familiar with that process can help us understand, what does the Corps do when they get comment letters? How do they respond to those, and what are the next steps?
Well, they typically respond to the questions. And if they can respond, they respond. If they need support, then they might request support. But that's the whole reason for the public comment, not to get comments and do nothing with them. So they do respond. It goes on the record.
So they would.
And it doesn't mean that the comments are accepted. They can respond and say, but they feel it's not an impact to the project. But it will be on the record.
Even though it's not their project.
Just simply because we're going through them as a regulatory permit, and any regulatory agency, when they put out for public comments, they got to address them one way or another.
Okay. That's all I've got. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Carlson. Next one I have on my list is Commissioner Callahan.
All right, first of all, I feel completely 100% duped. It was my understanding that this emergency meeting before the 29th was to draft a letter, if we decided to, with our concerns to the Army Corps of Engineers, not to go over copious documents and to read stuff out loud to the public. It was for that sole purpose. Did I miss something?
So I'll say it again. You are certainly free as a commission to submit a letter. My recommendation, given where we are in the process, would be if you feel you should feel strongly in submitting that letter, because I think your consultants have told you, and I'm telling you, that the commission as a body of the city submitting a comment letter on our own application is a bit awkward. And
it's a bit awkward that we didn't get this until 2 weeks ago.
Commissioner Callahan, I have already acknowledged that.
I know that.
And I have said that, you know, we understand that you didn't get this information before the application was submitted to the Army Corps of Engineers. I can't undo time. So my question for you is, as a commission, you are certainly free to vote your conscience and decide whether you want to submit a comment letter to the Army Corps of Engineers. I am not trying to stifle that, but I want you to understand the consequences of a body like the Harbor Commission submitting a comment letter on the city's application. That is all.
I'm just concerned that this will be the norm, that we get stuff too late to make any difference, and that we're becoming a window dressing for the city with actually no say in anything. I don't even know why we're here tonight.
Well, I will tell you, in my 5 years as the director of this department, this is the first time we've found ourselves in this position. So if you all want to take shots at me because we didn't get this to you, line up. I'm happy to take the shots. I apologized at the beginning. I take 100% full responsibility for this. So I can't undo it. So what I'm trying to do is help you through the process as best I can.
Yeah, let me take this back. So let's limit our comments to new stuff. I think we got the message across. We're not happy with this. So I would ask to get to the public comments and to get through this, let's not rehash stuff. I think we spanked the city staff hard enough on this one, and I'm certainly going to voice my opinion to our councilman that we weren't afforded the opportunity. So, Vicki, anything on the technical stuff or?
Yeah, it's like, why are we dredging in the harbor? We might as well just get a giant rake and rake it into the divots. It just, a lot of it just doesn't make sense. Topaz is one of the premier surf spots in the South Bay, and we're going to be dumping guck in there for all the people who surf there regularly. And I agree with Commissioner Carlson that stirring up all this stuff so close to shore is not a great idea. It needs to go someplace else. The migration of the tailings, I'm concerned about moving into the harbor closer. They haven't even addressed the placement of the sand dollar colony or the grouper habitat that's just inside the harbor that it's going to disrupt. I still am not sure why I'm even here tonight if we're being discouraged from doing anything. So I'm done.
Okay.
Well, I might just say that that disposal site off in the Topaz Groin area, the offshore outer harbor one, has been studied and developed by. We were involved in the study, but it was a Corps of Engineers and a County of Los Angeles joint project. They put out a massive report, in fact, 2 of them. A very large quantity from Marina del Rey was disposed there in the past. It's been used a few times for disposal, and the purpose was, as was stated in Kimberly's presentation, was this was a site that put store material, and then later it could be used to put that onto the beach. There's never been a problem, to my knowledge, in the past, other than when some debris was not properly taken out, that was in the material that was dredged. So obviously that gets addressed in the specifications in the best management practices to not have that occur again. But it's been very successful otherwise as a storage area for future use as needed, and been studied tremendously for that purpose and accepted.
I'm done.
Kimberly, can you address the sand dollar habitat and the grouper habitat inside the harbor?
They were the chamber's report actually did all of the biological surveys. My portion of it was the geological and chemical survey of the sediments, but they didn't identify any impacts to any sensitive species within their report. They did evaluate the locations, but they said that the project wasn't expected to cause impacts.
Okay. Let's see, Vicki, Commissioner Krazan.
Okay, I have some technical questions and I guess timing. I don't appreciate the timing. So how long do the studies and all the NRE that we had to pay, how long are they valid for? And I'm thinking about it for a number of reasons. If we were to amend it, I don't understand how much that sets us back. And if we do follow on smaller ones, which was mentioned, I think, a couple times in the report, that's not the preferable way to do it. It's not good to have several smaller ones. But if we were to do that, is there, we're paying a lot more NRE because we're doing several studies each time to prove it's okay, or?
So the sediment testing results are good for 3 years. So once the sediment's collected, so last year in October, so they're about a year old now, so they'll be good for 2 more years and applicable to the current permit cycle. And the small project is actually related to beach placement and is actually more due to disruption of the public and also the erosivity of the beach. It handles larger placements better than small placements. So if you put a small amount on the beach, it's not going to stick around for very long. Whereas if you put a larger amount on the beach, it would stay around for much longer. But as far as the sample collection and testing, depending on the type of analyses you would like to do, which it sounds like you might want to add some water quality studies to determine the impacts of the sediment, during placement and dredging. It would only take about 6 months probably, because you'd have to go back to the DMMT, propose the study, do the sampling and analysis, and then have them approve it again. And I'm sorry, just while I have the floor here for a second, I just wanted to say that the agencies with the chemical levels were not concerned. We had to talk them out of direct beach placement because they wanted to put it directly on the beach. They thought to them this was clean beach sand. So we thought it was actually more environmental to put it at the borrow pit, not only because of convenience and also, like I said, disrupting to the public and so on, but because we wanted to make sure we had a chance to screen it and remove the debris and to remove any impacts that might be caused by placement at the wrong time of year and that kind of thing. So I just wanted to reiterate that.
Thank you. And then there was never mention at the beginning of the immediate need. I guess it's for the mooring of the ships and on the far harbor side. And then, of course, the basin makes sense. The mention of the Army's delay, do we know the timing on that at all?
No, we
I don't think any of us know for sure.
Yeah. The challenge with the Army project is that they have to advance their projects into what they call their formal work plan. So the work that they've done so far, we've actually gotten the benefit of them doing some initial site assessments of the quality of the breakwall. What sort of started this was, and Roger, you've been out there, you probably could see it. There's some scalloping and scouring, mostly on the outer side of the breakwall, where you can actually see depressions that are happening in the break wall itself. And so they've gone out there and done their initial sort of structural analysis and determined that there does need to be a repair made, right? So they've sort of done that first level of work, but for them to then advance the project further, it has to become a formal part of their work plan, which then gets funded by, Congress and part of the president's budget. So it's a much longer funding cycle and complication to get it onto their work plan. We've been asking them regularly to get it on their work plan. It hasn't made it to their work plan. We're part of an organization that has lobbied them to get it into their work plan. It just hasn't made it onto their formal work program yet. So knowing that, and that, while they're quote unquote working with us by doing some of these initial assessments, because we aren't a formal project in their work plan, that's really where the uncertainty in the timeline lies. When do we make it onto their work plan? And then from that date, how far out is it until they actually are doing the implementation of the project itself?
Okay. And then I guess a comment on the smaller areas that aren't captured here. I guess we could choose to not do anything, choose to do an amendment, or choose to have a separate permit and then have the work done at the same time to save work, to save money on the actual work performance.
So try to coordinate this low volume maintenance permit with the larger dredging project and see if when you get to the implementation, you could coordinate the two with the contract.
Right.
I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, Ron. I mean, you'd be slowing one permit down, starting another permit process, and then try to catch them up together when you're actually going out into the field.
Yeah, it's, I don't have the answer. It's possible. It just depends how fast it was done, how fast the agencies were allowed to go through, because it's a minor amount of dredging. So it wouldn't have a lot of time to catch up with this project if this project was to stay on schedule. But it might be possible. I don't know.
Okay. And it was mentioned that the current width of the jetty, of the sand north of the jetty, is 70 feet. And it's been up to 250 feet in the past. And that's LA County's, purview to do the renourishment. Do we know what their criteria is for when they would renourish that area?
Well, we know from talking to the Los Angeles Corps people involved, and they don't see a need to do it now because the 70 feet is considered stable enough. So that as Kimberly went over initially, it's better to put on a larger volume versus a relatively small volume because they haven't been successful in the past. So they normally wait until it's more depleted. And we did discuss that with the people at the Los Angeles Corps that would be involved. And that was their feeling.
Right, I understand. I just thought, was there some hard metric there on the width?
Well, I think I'm sorry, Ron, but the area north of the Topaz Jetty is historically more narrow than the area south. So the area south that's currently 100 to 170 feet wide was the area that was widened to 250. The area north of the jetty has gone through a couple of nourishment events, and they found that the stable shoreline is at about 70 feet currently. So they're not seeing any erosivity that's impacting shoreline. I think that one of the primary things that they have impacts to is the bike path that's right there on the beach. But once they start seeing some impacts to that, I know it sounds like, oh, you're waiting too late once you see impacts, but it sounds like that's about when they decide to start triggering that replacement and replenishment of the sand.
Okay.
Yeah, and as Kimberly points out, it's really just that northern section. The southern section has remained very stable at a much wider width, but yes, they even hold off at the 70 feet until it becomes more critical.
Okay. The comment on the in-harbor placement that talked about the grain mismatch was not good. What's the implication of it placing the sand, the depositing there, if the grain mismatch exist?
So that's one of the compatibility requirements that you look for primarily are grain size. So you want to look for beach nourishment, you want to look for something within, it has 80% or more sand, but then for other placement sites, you want to make sure that the sub-bottom habitat is going to be similar to the stuff that you put on top. So the reason we thought that it would be better to put heavier sand on was, like we discussed, was to cap those sediments to create increased circulation and flush to the harbor. As far as like studies to do that, it hasn't been done yet, but that's kind of why you look at it. You just want to make sure that your sand is, or your sediment is similar that you're placing at a site versus not similar. Like you typically want them to be very similar.
Okay. And then the last things I wanted to say were just some comments on we don't have enough sand that we're needing to deal with here to use on our beaches, but can we sell the sand? Is there another, some stretch of PV that would want to utilize this good sand? And yeah, that's all I had. Thank you.
Yeah, it's probably not a large enough volume to go through the cost just to try to do something like that, because that'd be more studies to even be able to take it, and you got to find out who's going to take it, and it's a relatively small quantity of material from that standpoint.
Okay.
You finished, Commissioner?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Let's see, Commissioner Bauer.
Thank you, Chair Light. No, I just had a couple comments. Of course, when you go and do this dredging and then move this material and place it somewhere else, well, you're going to, DDT essentially adheres itself to the sediment. And so just by moving it and stirring it up, we are going to be resuspending this DDT. And a lot of its components, as it degrades, it turns into something called DDTR, which is even worse and enters our food chain. So I was wondering, is there any plans to do any monitoring of, as we're doing this, to monitor this situation, or even to attempt to remediate this situation? There's ways, for instance, that you can do some photo remediation of this material to try and reduce the quantities of DDT as we move it. Has there been any thoughts to doing that?
Not that I know of. It didn't come up with the agency review, so that wasn't something that the water board seemed to think was of concern. But I think that it would have potentially come up with the discussions of the permit application and the best management practices if it was necessary.
Yeah, because in a way, taking the sand and putting it on shore in some ways is safer because it will degrade faster there. You're not stirring it up where it's now entering the fish. But it's something, I'm just wondering if they've studied this enough, because the levels of DDT are certainly going to be going up quite a bit higher just by stirring this stuff and moving it around. It's real concerning. So I don't know, Stephen. I understand. I understand where we're at right here, but it just feels like, boy, like as everybody has said, it seems like this whole discussion should have happened a lot earlier. Anyway, thank you for your time.
Are you finished, Commissioner Bauer?
Yes, I am.
Thank you. Let's see, Commissioner Kilroy. If you're talking, we can't hear you.
Yeah, sorry. Somehow I had raised the hand an hour plus ago, but somehow it got unraised. Anyway, seems like one of the biggest areas of concern is depositing or redepositing the sand in the harbor. Originally, your comment had to do with cost, trying to save money by not transporting it to the other site outside the harbor. So my first question is, what's the difference in cost, or what's the additional cost to transport all the material outside the harbor?
Well, that's going to come down to, how the contractor bids the project for the number of round trips that he makes for that material and so forth. So it is a cost factor, but obviously it's going to be how the contractor bids it.
Well, I'd make the recommendation then, as a commission, that that's the way the contract is written. It doesn't affect our permits. It doesn't affect anything going forward. Everything else can go forward. It takes out of the mix, so to speak, I think, some of the major concerns that we've heard tonight from the other commissioners. So that's the first thing that actually is something positive we can do without throwing any monkey wrenches in. My background is in wastewater remediation, environmental hazardous waste issues and whatnot. I sent an EPA report to Director Proud earlier today. I apologize for not getting it out earlier, but it was an EPA report. The entire PV Peninsula is a Superfund site for DDT. And I'm not trying to minimize what we're talking about here with regards to the levels of DDT in our harbor, but there's been a lot of questions about where this stuff has come from, and there's some great articles written about, well, they're not articles, they're studies about how this stuff has basically contaminated the entire ocean bottom in the Southern California.
Did we lose Commissioner Kilroy?
I think he's frozen for everyone, right? There we go.
Sorry, were you unfrozen?
Yeah, you're back. We may have lost you somewhere right around the entire Southern California, and then you froze.
Okay, sorry about that. Wait till my battery runs dead on my laptop. Anyway, specifically mentioned was the sewer outfalls because the chemical plant in Torrance used the sanitary sewer discharge for a lot of its effluent. And back in the day, the stuff wasn't tested and treated the way it is now. So you had any place there was an outfall, whether it's the Hyperion outfall or I'm not sure which one you call that, spewing out tons of this stuff for decades. So when we talk about remediation of our harbor and the low levels we've got here, number one, it would be prohibitively expensive to try to remediate it to even lower levels. And two, you're good to some extent, new migrating sand, new migrating sediment is going to bring it back in to some extent. So the other thing that's probably should be understood about this stuff is it's not soluble in water. If it was soluble in water, it would have dissolved, washed away, and gone into the Pacific Ocean. It's heavier than water, so it sits down in the sediments. And I'm not trying to minimize the impact of stirring this stuff up because, yeah, it's likely to lead to slightly higher levels in the water. But if it was water soluble, it wouldn't be a problem because it'd be gone. It would have been gone decades ago. It would have washed out of the soil over time. So it's not water soluble. It's heavier than water, and that's why it sits in the sediment for so doggone long. Anyway, we know we need to dredge. We know we got to put it somewhere. So I don't think there's really much to be had about that. It is an interesting point. I like Commissioner Bauer's point about it might be safer to put it on the sand because of the sun's impacts on degrading it further. And yeah, there is some bad guys that get, as it decomposes, it's not like it immediately decomposes and goes to nothing. It's got some intermediaries in there that aren't very good either. Anyway, my thing about this would be to make a recommendation that the bid be put out so that all the sediment is transported outside the harbor area. I don't know what more positive thing we can have on it at this point moving forward than that particular aspect of it. I do like the comment about from Commissioner Shazan about trying to parallel the maintenance permit at the same time, or trying to get it to catch up. There seemed to be some question whether it would or not. What's the harm in trying? Let's see if we can't get that permit pushed forward, and possibly by the time we're ready to go out to bid, we can bid both at the same time, take care of the hand launch ramp, truck it all outside the harbor, and move forward with it. So those are my comments on it, and that would be my recommendation for the commission going forward to make that formal recommendation.
Okay, anything else, Commissioner Kilroy?
That's it. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to address a couple areas, or mostly questions. I think these are going to be for Ron or Kimbry. On the chemical analysis, I know we've been talking about DDT, but there's also been PCBs noted, and I think also polyaromatic hydrocarbons, PAH. And so you had mentioned that the prior report or analysis done in the early 2000s had similar levels, but I thought none of these chemicals exceeded the ERLs in the prior analysis. Was I wrong?
No, that's correct. I'm sorry. I said I think I didn't have the report right in front of me. I said I think the chemical levels are a little more elevated than the past results, but the grain size was very similar.
Okay, so the sediment is similar, but the chemicals are actually higher, correct?
Correct.
Okay. I mean, I have some familiarity with water standards. I don't know much about ERLs and ERMs. You know, these aren't quite like MCLs for drinking water standards. Right? MCLs are absolute, right? If you exceed those pollutant limits as an MCL, it's not drinkable water, right? But what you're saying here is these ERLs are more like screening levels, correct? And they're not officially adopted by Region 9 or the Water Quality Board? Okay. So I was just curious. I know several of the chemicals did exceed the lower limit, but did not exceed the medium limit other than chlordane, right? Chlordane actually exceeded both, right? Okay.
Correct.
It's interesting because chlordane and dieldrin, which are both listed and had relatively high levels, are actually been banned for 30 years and are showing up here, but did not show up in your 2004 prior chemical analysis. So it's been building up. I was just wondering, what levels would the Army Corps and or the Regional Water Board determine would be unsafe, or they would have halted the project? Clearly, if we're above the lower limit, but below the medium limit, that was deemed safe, correct? And
correct.
And the project proceeded. But so, at what level would because I don't know much about these limits, would it require several pollutants to be over the medium limits, not just chlordane? Like at what level?
So the levels, you're correct. The ERM was typically the screening value. I have to admit that it sometimes seems somewhat subjective on the terms of the agencies on what they feel is more or less of concern based on its level. And there are additive effects when you see, for example, multiple metals or multiple other analytes combined with those. But these levels to the agencies were not egregiously like high, I guess, comparatively. So I
Right, I guess that's
it
what I'm
does seem like
trying.
the ERM would be the value, but I guess as far as like actual regulatory limits, the TTLC for hazardous waste is probably the closest thing that you'll get. And that would say that it is a hazardous substance, and none of these values come anywhere near that.
Right, I'm somewhat familiar with those limits as well. So, I'm just trying to figure this out. If we had saw this information 6 months ago, and the project would have moved forward from a safety standpoint, correct? I mean, all the people who have looked into this, the various groups, the Army Corps and the Water Quality Board, all the scientists, I'm sure there are many scientists involved here, right? Put a halt to this because of these toxicity levels or these screening levels. That's what I'm hearing.
Correct. Yeah,
Okay.
no one.
And there was no concern raised about chloridating because that did exceed the medium limits.
They didn't say anything.
And
And I
there's
did
no-
present it. I gave them pretty much a very similar presentation. We did talk about it. I did have actually a table that pointed it out so it was very apparent. They had a copy of the report.
Okay. And to address some of the other commissioners' concerns about safety, I mean, were there any mitigation measures proposed or required as part of this project due to the possible unsafe movement of the soil, or anything proposed by the Water Board or the Army Corps?
No, the only safety things that they were concerned about is, like we said, the environmental windows for the sea bass and the species of concern. But as far as chemical levels, there weren't any. It was to the point that, like I mentioned before, they were wondering why we didn't want to just put it on the beach. And we thought, well, with the debris and everything, it would be better for sure to put at the bar site first.
I see. And I guess to Commissioner Kilroy's point, I'm just trying to understand the movement of of these chemicals, because they did not show up 15 years ago, but clearly they're building up in the harbor here. Is the theory they're coming from the PV Peninsula, or is it coming north to south? Because I thought you had said, or someone said earlier, that the movement of the shoaling was coming from north to south, correct? Because the harbor is part of the larger Santa Monica Bay, is my understanding. And we're on the south end of that Santa Monica Bay. So are we getting more movement north to south, which is obviously more populous areas and probably more stormwater discharges coming from Santa Monica and, the center part of the bay? Or is the water being moved more from south to north from PV, which is where the incident was that Commissioner Kilroy referred to?
The prevailing sediment transport is north to south.
North to south.
There can be some reversals at certain times of the year, but the prevailing is north to south. And then, of course, the submarine canyons there, a lot of that sediment ends up going down the canyon.
Okay. So I guess what I'm hearing is this is going to be an ongoing concern, the buildup of these chemicals, because they're really coming from outside the harbor. They're coming from most likely the middle of Santa Monica Bay or sources that are north of us, right? More populous areas north of us, correct? Is that what I'm hearing?
Could be. It's more difficult to move around the Palos Verdes Peninsula from LA. I mean, to come from there in a northerly direction.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen the stormwater flow discharge maps, but I assume there's lots of discharge points north of us from Santa Monica and central LA, west LA, much more populous areas.
Yes.
I think that's safe to assume.
I would agree.
Okay. And then I guess a couple more points here. I guess I'm a little confused. What is the exact recommendation? We keep hearing outer harbor, inner harbor. What's the percentage of the dredge materials going to be placed in harbor versus the outer harbor, or has that not been decided?
No, I think it's specified in what was presented, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kimberly, but I think we had like 29,000 cubic yards in harbor, and the remainder of the 62,000 was
correct. Yeah. When we designed the project, we actually wanted to optimize using that in-harbor placement site because we thought it was very opportunistic, like we described it, and cost efficient, and it kept us from putting, you know, these chemicals outside of the harbor and kind of kept them where they already exist. So, yeah, the 29,000 cubic yards was what we
So
proposed.
what's the percentage breakdown? Was it 30% in harbor, 70% out?
Well,
It's a little bit
29 would be
less than
based on
50.
62,000 yards, so it'd be, you know, it would be more percentage than that.
It's like 48-52.
Oh, so it's almost 50-50.
Almost 50-50, correct?
Okay. But the outer harbor area can actually hold all of it, correct?
Correct, correct.
Okay. And so the permit that's going to be issued, is it going to be very specific? You got to do the 48% in harbor and a 52 out harbor, or is it you're being permitted to do either or in whatever percentage you like?
My guess is it's going to be permitted on the project where we have access to both those sites. If the volumes change a bit or even all went to the offshore, it might be okay.
I see. So I guess this is a question back to maybe Steve or the chairman. I mean, would it derail the process if we had recommended or commented that it be moved all offshore, if that was something the commission wanted? Would that derail the process?
And again, I'm going to ask maybe Ron or Andy, I don't know if you know, but you know, the application that we submitted does specify that there's this division of the disposal of the material. I was just pulling up the paragraph where we talk about the nature of the activity. We talk about the total volume of being 62,000 cubic yards. We talk about the proposed placement for the dredged materials of 29,000 cubic yard within the in-harbor placement and 33 in the near-shore placement. We don't necessarily, in this particular document that I see in the application, we haven't structured it to say, well, it's an either or, and we have the flexibility to decide at the time whether we want to take all 62,000 yards to the near shore placement area. So I don't know, you know, without revising maybe the permit application, obviously the analytical work has already been done.
Right.
A matter of revising the application to the Corps to be specific that we want to change the location, or we would want to have all 62,000 yards dumped in the near shore disposal area.
Well, yeah, I completely understand the regulatory process, but the way I read or at least the materials given to us, it didn't seem like you guys were fixed, but I could be wrong. You know, I don't know what correspondence was given to the Army Corps and what they evaluated in the public documents. But again, I just throw that out to the chairman, if Chairman Light, if that's something the commission wants to talk about. I don't necessarily want to derail. All the work's been done thus far. But if it is a concern to the commission that we're going to be removing those materials and keeping it inside the harbor, the borrowed site outside the harbor clearly can hold it all. And if the Army Corps is giving us permission to do that, what's the harm? Again, I don't know someone had commented on the grouper fish or whatever. You know, I don't know the habitats, if that's close or not. You know, I don't know what the issue there is, but just a thought. I think that's all I have. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Walters. I'd ask that we refrain from making any motions until we hear the public. I see two hands are still up. I see Commissioner Krazan and Commissioner Kilroy. Did you just not unraise your hand, or did you re-raise it?
I apologize. I didn't unraise it. I'll do that now.
Commissioner Krazan?
I was just going to say, when I read the application, it's up to 29,000 cubic yards within in harbor and 33,000 in the near shore. So to me, you would need to amend the 33,000 to say up to the full amount.
That's how I read it as well. If you pull up the actual application form, there's a description in there, description of activity, and the way Commissioner Krazan is presenting it is how that's drafted.
And the only other question I had was what comes back to this commission later? Do the exact plan and all of that, do we get say and like, yeah, let's limit it to not do it in December per that that paper that was included in the blue folder, for example, and not start till January? Do we get input later?
So we will ultimately do a contract. I mean, we are not contracted to do the actual dredging work at this point, right? So the capital improvement plan breaks up the scope of work for us to do this preliminary work, and then ultimately we come back with a contract. And when we issue that contract, inside that contract, we'll obviously have all the plans and specs, and it'll detail out the work windows and all of the other best management practices that are going to be required. Typically, our public works contracts, the contracts themselves, don't come back to the commissions for their consideration. Andy, I don't know if this goes to your Public Works Commission or if it goes just straight to the city council. Maybe you could kind of tell us what the contracting process is, because that's where the details like work windows and BMPs and all those things would be detailed out when we do the RFP for the selection of the consultants themselves.
Right. So based on the permit requirements that we get when we get through this permitting phase of this, we will develop design and construction bid documents that will go directly to the council for approval. That's our normal process. Approval of plans and specifications and authorization to advertise for the work. So that's our normal process. That's what we intended to do or still intend to do unless otherwise directed by the council.
Okay, so then if we had any advice on the specifics, we would just agendize that and then pass our recommendations on the details to the council and the city.
Well, we won't know until we see it on the council agenda.
Well, if I'm hearing Andy correctly, though, there'll be a permit that gets issued that will have a lot of that criteria that's in there. So once the permit has been issued and that criteria has been determined by the regulatory agencies, we fold that information into the contracting requirements for the contractor, which then becomes the basis for going out, selecting the contractor, and making a recommendation to the city council. So I'm not, I mean, it will go to the council as just part of our normal contracting process, but it will be reflective of whatever the permit is issued, and the permit will reflect the comments that they're being received right now as part of the comment period. If that all makes sense.
Yeah, I'm thinking of details that aren't, I guess, permit, maybe not necessarily permit related, you know. That's all for now.
Okay, thank you. So Director Proud, I'm not sure how we read, how we tell who from the public is.
Yeah, we have 4 people from the public who are here to speak on this issue. I'm going to take, this is my first crack at operating the system here to activate them. So what I think I'll do is just take them in an order that I see here. So I'm going to start with Michael, and I apologize if I mispronounce your last name, Kofer. I'm going to turn your mic on. So you should now have an active mic if you unmute yourself. And Chair, we typically have public comment that lasts for 3 minutes. That's at your discretion if you want to continue that. So we can keep a timer on that if you'd like.
Yeah, and let's follow normal protocol, and then we can choose to extend if we want.
So let me get my timer here. So Michael, can you hear us, and can we hear you?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. Well, my name is Michael Coffer. I'm providing expert public testimony on the King Harbor Maintenance Dredging Project and its supportive documentation that was brought before the Commission in mid-October. I'm a consulting biologist who's been studying the giant sea bass nursery site along the city of Redondo's shoreline for 7 years. My latest and most relevant paper was published in the California Department of Fish and Wildlife's Journal this February, titled planning shoreline infrastructure projects at Redondo Beach, California, to avoid impacting a giant sea bass nursery site. And I've submitted that paper into your public record. Giant sea bass are an international endangered species and are also prohibited from intentional capture or harm in California. After the spawns, the vast majority of the babies appear just outside the surf line at nursery sites. Of the only 4 nursery sites known, the shallows between Redondo Beach Pier and Topaz Jetty seasonally support the highest density of baby giant sea bass anywhere in California. Redondo is very important for the recovery of this fish from historic overfishing. The babies are in the nursery site from mid-July to the end of each year, when no work that could impact the nursery site should be done. But for 6.5 months, from the beginning of each year to July 15th, baby giant sea bass are absent from the nursery sites, and so dredging and sediment dumping during that period should not impact this fish. I wrote my nursery site paper to offer the city of Redondo Beach and the resource agency some best management practices to consider when planning shoreline infrastructure projects. If permits restrict work to the months when the nursery site is unoccupied and the dredge spoils are dumped in the harbor and in the temporary nearshore placement area as it's mapped, there should be no significant impact on baby giant sea bass. No work schedule has been proposed, but the project would take at most 60 days. And that gives the city the opportunity to restrict dredging and dumping to the 6.5 months between January 1st and July 15th to avoid potentially impacting your nursery site. The permit application says that the dredging would be performed outside of the sea bass spawning season between July and September. That's helpful, but only partially correct. The nursery site is active from July 15th to the end of the year, and it extends from the pier all the way to the groin jetty. The further down the coast the spoils are placed from the jetty and from the nursery site, the better. But if spoils are placed in the temporary placement area, it's also called the outer harbor placement area, as mapped in the Noble Consultants and Chambers Group documentation, when the nursery site is unoccupied, this should be okay. If the spoils end up...
That's your 3-minute window, just so you know.
Motion to extend for another 3 minutes.
Second.
Thank you. If spoils end up closer to Topaz Jetty than the maps indicate, then it could impact the nursery site, which begins directly off the groin jetty. I'm not sure, I can't see myself on this screen, so I'm not sure whether my background is visible that shows the placement of all of the giant sea bass that I've seen in the past 6-7 years. But that map is also in my paper. The nursery site begins, according to your documentation, about 650 feet north of the placement area. But they're different depictions of the width of the placement area.
Could you splash a hooch in a cup?
What's that? So anyway, it's not 3/4 of a mile away from the placement area, as the consultant's technical report indicates. For future projects, the acquisition and screening of the placement area sand should only occur between January 1st and July 15th, when the nursery site's inactive. And screening should absolutely not occur in the water above or directly offshore from the nursery site between Redondo Beach and Topaz Groin Jetty. If spoils are pumped from the barge onto the dry sand along Redondo Beach, that could be done at any time of the year without impacting baby giant sea bass, and that would also help to replenish Redondo's beach sand. Thank you for the opportunity to address the commission.
Thank you. I think I found your report very enlightening and easy for someone like me to read. So that was the graphics were perfect. So, so you have no concern with you commented that it's not 3/4 of a mile, that it's 650 feet, but you don't see that as a problem with the way they've outlined the dump area outside the harbor?
Well, that area appears in different places depending on what document you read. In fact, Kimber's first graphic of the outer placement area shows the footprint that extends all the way over to the jetty, and that's totally different from all the documentation that I've seen that shows it much farther down the beach. At 650 feet farther down the beach is where the environmental documentation shows that footprint to begin, not right off the groin jetty.
Kimberly, can you? I'm having trouble pulling up all the different documents. Does your report show different laydowns of that?
The actual, the figures in this presentation do show a different outline. The final report was updated to show the correct size of the site. And I apologize, that was an oversight on my behalf. I reused the same figures from our stat presentation after that and didn't update them once that comment came in. So in our final report, they should be the correct size.
As long as we can move the material farther down from the jetty, because I've found very young brown phase baby giant sea bass directly off the jetty. That's the start point. It's always been the start point for my surveys that extend from the jetty over to the pier and back and forth in the shallows. So that jetty is the boundary. It can be considered the boundary of the nursery site. Yes, baby giant sea bass move away from there, but most of them are concentrated in that particular area. The past documentation on this species has talked about the center of the canyon as being the place where the giant sea bass are mostly found. That is the center of the abundance. They're spread all up and down the area between the groin jetty and the pier. Yesterday I had two of them very close to the pier, but they should be moving more to the south and the north when they get older.
Okay, so I can't resist. Are they ill-tempered sea bass?
Yes. Exactly.
Okay, I see Roger or Commissioner Carlson, you've raised your hand. Did you have a question?
Thanks, I did. One question. So the last time sand was dumped in this area was from the Marina del Rey dredging project, and that sand had a lot of trash in it. And the sand and that trash was, thrown throughout the water column, but it was also embedded in the sand. There was just, so much silt and debris. You could find, old shredded plastic in the sand at Vets Park, off the stairs, throughout the area. So my question for Mike is, you don't have concerns as long as we're done dredging and dumping during the last 6 months of the year. Would you have concerns if we placed a lot of trash in that area and left a lot of debris and plastic and maybe even, some DDT?
Yes, I would. I would have the concern, but I'm really here to focus on my specialty, which is the young of the year giant sea bass. There may be others who would be better able to speak to that issue.
I'm sorry. What I specifically meant was, would the giant sea bass be affected if that area had, a lot of loose trash in the sand instead of just being the clean sand it is now?
I really have no idea because I've never studied a site that had a lot of trash in it. What I will say is that when the Army Corps did the last project, they happened to do their activity right dead center of the giant sea bass period of occupancy It was the absolute worst time of year to do it. But that was the year before we even knew there were any giant sea bass in that area. Maybe 2 years before. Late 2013, 2014 is when Cal State Northridge began their studies of that area.
Okay, thanks.
I might add that during the DDMO process, both of those topics came up because there was obviously a real concern with the Marina del Rey dredge disposal of that offshore site because of the trash. So we are addressing that in the plans and specifications to have strong language in there and best management practices to eliminate the problem that unfortunately occurred that time. We also addressed the sea bass and said that we would time the project so it would happen during a time period where they would not be impacted.
Yeah, unfortunately, you got those dates wrong. You didn't reference this paper, and you called the species sea bass, which is unclear even for a common name. There's white sea bass, black sea bass, giant sea bass, kelp bass, calico bass, sand bass, and barred sand bass, all in this region.
Okay, well, I'm not speaking to that because that came from Chambers. They did the biological marine studies, but and diving. But we addressed the fact that we would have a specified time period for doing the dredging project in the plans and specifications that would avoid impact to the sea bass, the juveniles, and so forth. I mean, that was discussed at length during the DDMO process.
Okay, I'm going to curtail this. Thanks. We're talking public comment right now, so I'd like to get through the public comment.
Thank you.
So anything else, Commissioner Carlson?
No, sorry about that.
Okay, Commissioner Callahan, do you have a question for Mr. Kofer?
No, actually, he answered it. Thank you.
Okay, I don't think I see any other hands on that. So, Director Proud, I think we're ready for the next public testimony. Thank you, Mr. Kofer. Your insight, your paper is invaluable in this, so really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, next person that is up for public comment is Lee Caller. I'm going to turn your microphone on, and if you could unmute yourself, you're open for public comment. And I will...
All right, hopefully you can hear me.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
All right, so I'm Lee Caller. I'll first introduce myself as Commodore King Harbor Yacht Club. And I have a question regarding the scope of the dredging that has come up. Looking at the maps, it looks like it's extending all the way to the very north end of the channel, which I would think would include the area to the west side of our very west docks, all the way up to where the parking lot is. So I'm just raising that as a question that's frequently coming to me, and I'm going to switch hats now here as a scuba diver who has dove frequently off of Veterans Park. I recall back when they did the dredging off of Marina del Rey and dumped the sand, there was indeed a lot of trash that then ended up on the bottom afterwards, all the way down as deep as we go, which is 100 feet. And we actually had to do several cleanup days to actually clean that up. So I would hope that, as has been indicated, that we are taking steps to rectify that situation for any future dumping. Thank you.
Do you have any concerns with dumping in the harbor?
Commissioner Light, I share your questions. I'm not an expert enough to really know whether or not it's going to make a difference or not. I do understand that there's also in that area inside the harbor some wildlife there that we also want to protect. As I said, I'm not an expert in that area. I would hope, though, that we don't have the amount of trash in this debris in the dredging here as there would have been at the bottom of Bayona Creek at Marina del Rey.
Okay. So is your concern on the location at the north end, the impact to the yacht club docks?
Not so much. Our concern, I think, is more that they're going to be missed because there is a lot of buildup to the west side of those docks. So much that at low tide, the far northwest corner of our docks are right now sitting on the bottom.
Director Proud, can we answer the question on how far north this goes? It's tough to tell from the drawing.
Yeah, I'd probably have to ask either Ron or Kimbry. He's providing a general description. The maps that you have there are probably the closest visual representation. Looking to see if there's something else.
I believe the project description shows it a little clearer. I believe. I don't have that in front of me, but we put some of the figures and cross sections from the drawings that are still being developed, obviously.
So you don't know if to the extent that you're hitting that dock area with the.
It might not. I'm going by. I haven't looked at it for a while, but
I understand. Kimbry, do you know better?
I don't have a comment on that.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, Chair Light, I can share a screen with you and at the scale these are at, and you're kind of drilling down into some detail, but let me see if I throw a screen share shot up here for you. This is out of the report, and you're really looking at, I can try and blow it up for you. You're really talking about this area up here. It's probably the width of the pin mark.
Yeah.
If you drew it with a fatter pin, it would be included, and if you drew it with a skinnier pin, it wouldn't be. So we're talking about this area up here as I understand it.
Yes.
And, I'm trying to blow it up here as much as I can, but it'll get pixelated here. But that's what's shown in the drawing right now. So it's, is it addressing the concern? It goes pretty far north. This is the ramp that comes down, out of this parking lot right here. So it is extending all the way up to that particular point as it's drawn on this map. So, as drawn, it seems like it's covering that area, but we'd really have to pull up something that has a little more detail on it to be able to tell whether that's truly the case or not.
Okay, understand. Thank you.
Yeah.
Anything else, Lee?
No, thank you. That's it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Excuse me, Chair Light. I'm having trouble with my audio. I could not hear Lee Caller at all. So if I disappear, it's not because I'll just have to zoom back in.
Okay. We heard him loud and clear, so.
Okay, I didn't hear anything.
Yeah.
We select mute.
And your video shows you on mute, but yeah, we can hear you. So I'm not sure. It might be worth signing back out and signing back in to see if that corrects the problem. The next public speaker is Ken Curtis, and Ken, I will turn you on here. You can turn your mic off, and you are free to speak to the commission, sir.
All right, and I will confirm you can hear me talking.
We can. Thank you.
Okay, and this is audio only and not video, right?
That's correct, sir.
It's too bad because I'm a very attractive man wearing a Dodgers shirt right now.
Yeah, and by the way, they did win, so I don't know if people have been locked in this. The Dodgers did win the World Series, so congrats to all the Dodger fans.
If I was taping this right now, you would be my worst enemy.
Yeah.
I wasn't going to say a word about that to anybody. Anyhow, my name is Ken Curtis. I'm a scuba instructor for the last 40 years. I own a dive shop in Beverly Hills, Reef Seekers Dive Company. I've been chairman of Chamber Day, which is a benefit for the Catalina Hyperbaric Chamber, for about the last 30 years. I'm a team leader at the Aquarium of the Pacific, and I spent about 10 years as a member of the statewide interest group during the Marine Life Protection Act process. I forwarded some materials to Commissioner Carlson. I was hoping we might have seen tonight, one of which is a 4-minute video, which is called The Trashing of Veterans Park, along with some other just little documentation. But I won't say I'm an elected representative from the dive community because we're not that organized, but I will suggest I'm speaking for the sentiments of the dive community when I say our issues deal with not the dredging itself, but what you're going to do with it, and specifically that placement area just south of the Topaz jetty. As has been referenced, I've never called it the Marina Del Rey sand replacement, but the 2012 sand replacement episode was just horrendous on for the dive community. If you don't dive, basically the area between from the harbor entrance south to the Topaz jetty, we call Veterans Park. So it's all that area right off there. And that area is a major dive area. It's a training area. As Mike mentioned, it's a giant sea bass breeding area. No one has mentioned it's a squid breeding area as well, roughly December to March. I think Fish and Wildlife doesn't consider squid an endangered species, so they don't do it. But if you're a horny squid, you want to have a clean bottom there, December to March. But what happened in 2012 was basically, has been alluded to, is the area literally became a trashed up dumping ground. And it was due to the dredge. We really do believe the Dutra dredge that was located by the jetty. As soon as that thing started operations, our visibility, which is normally 10 to 20 feet, went down to 2 feet. We started finding black sludge covering the bottom, mainly from the 35-foot area out to the 100-foot area. There was trash everywhere. And as Mr. Collier mentioned, there were a number of cleanups that were organized. And I would estimate that we pulled out literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pounds of trash, much of which is documented in that 4-minute video that I mentioned that I gave to Commissioner Carlson called The Trashing of Veterans Park. So from a dive industry standpoint, dive community standpoint, our major concern is what are you going to do with all this material once you get there? If you're going to take it to a landfill, we have no issues. We have no issue with the project in terms of the dredging. But if you're going to be dumping it back in that placement area, which if I'm recalling correctly is about 60, 70, 80 feet deep. Basically, a barge pulls over the top of it, a trap door opens up, and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cubic yards or thousands of cubic yards of sand fall down. It drifts. If it's not clean, the way the currents run there's a little circular current that'll carry it right up into the Veterans Park area. It then, as you mentioned in the site assessment that I read through, in section 2.2, I think it is, the literal current carries stuff down into the canyon. So what we want to make sure is that we've learned from the mistakes of 2012. We had meetings with the Army Corps of Engineers, and we were assured back then it'll not happen again. And that's what we want to make sure happens this time, because, and the other thing I would just wonder with that, I'll call it the dumping area, the temporary placement area, does anyone ever take sand out of there? Because if they don't, why are we putting more in there if it never gets used? I'm assuming my 3 minutes are up.
Yes.
Just briefly, sand has definitely been taken out of that area and placed on the beach, so it has happened.
Okay, it's just a question as opposed to, it's just like, as long as it's getting used, that's fine.
And you're right, that last dredging operation was a disaster from the trash standpoint. We're all aware of that.
Yes, and like I said, Commissioner Carlson has the link to the video. If it's inappropriate, I can get it to you guys if he can't give you any of those documents directly, so we can work on that.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Carlson, you got your hand raised?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I attempted to submit that as a blue folder item. So Director Proud, you've got that. You said we may be able to share it during the meeting. I'm not sure what we do here.
So I make a motion to receive and file.
Well, let me see if I can actually pull it up here, and I could maybe I can actually run it and share it.
Don't we still have to make the motion?
Yeah.
Any seconds?
I'll second.
Anybody opposed?
The link is to the YouTube page. In theory, you should be able to bring it up and do a share screen.
Yeah, I think, well, let's see here.
And make sure, and if you do, make sure you check, there's two little boxes under the share screen. that is, it makes it video, the audio and the video frame rates are compatible then with Zoom.
All right, we're stretching my technical capability here, but let me see what I can do here. Hold on one second. This will be a first. So let's see. Here we go. There's that.
Oh, there you go.
Okay.
If you hit play, it should run. Now, I'm not hearing any audio.
So the audio is coming through my computer. Here we go. Let's see. Share.
I don't see anything.
Let's see.
Students and regular divers alike for decades.
I'm an LA County instructor, and I bring my students here all the time, and it's really important that they see a nice, clean environment.
What I love about Betts Park as a dive site is that they have great amenities, conditions are great, and there's a lot of stuff to see.
But all of that changed in August when this barge, the Paula Lee, arrived for a sand renourishment project. The ocean floor between the barge and the Redondo Pier started getting littered with trash and debris.
When we learned how to dive here, it was trash free, the visibility was good, it was a great place. You come out here today and it's littered with trash everywhere.
Everybody who comes here to dive, dives to see the fish and the wildlife. Nobody comes here to see the trash.
Divers develop a sense of ownership and responsibility for the places we dive.
It's very upsetting to see our dive site trash, and more importantly, the ocean itself. So we decided to come down here and do something about it since we didn't see anybody else doing anything about it. We put the call out, and the divers of our community really care about their dive site and the ocean itself, and people just came out and enjoyed it. This is our second night dive in terms of getting the trash off the substrate here at Betts Beach.
I've been diving this area for about 12 years, and as an instructor, it's a shame to see how much trash has been located here. And it's important for us to clean it up so we can bring more students to this area.
It's a special place because I actually got certified here, and this is where I first learned to dive. So this is kind of like home.
The barge has just been dumping sand, dumping trash throughout the whole time it was here, and now we're here to clean it up.
So are you taking a class or?
Oh, we're going to help clean up trash in the water.
And what did they find on this particular night?
When we were diving tonight, we saw a lot of trash, a lot of paper, a lot of plastic, and it was just everywhere. It's just devastating. And this certainly is not the same dive site as it was a few months ago when I got certified here.
I've dove here 30, 40 times over the past 12 months. And it's night and day. Trash between before the barge came, after the barge came. If I describe what it looked like to someone who's not a diver, who hasn't been down there, it's borderline landfill.
I've been diving here for about 9 years, about 200 dives a year. When I first got down there and saw the trash, it was shocking. My eyes kept going farther and farther out and seeing more trash and more trash. It was unbelievable. It was like being in the middle of a hurricane of plastic and garbage.
Been diving here at Veterans Park for about 8 years now, probably about 100 or so dives a year, and this is the first time I've seen this. All this trash has the same thing in common. It's all buried partially in the sand. You pick up a piece to bring it in, and it just breaks, and there's more and more. It just keeps coming. The trash is covered with sand, and it was never here before. It was never like this until now.
In the absence of any kind of official efforts to clean things up, more dives are scheduled on an ad hoc basis.
I think we're making a difference. Over our last 2 dives, we poured out over 100 pounds of trash. But we shouldn't have had to do this in the first place.
No, we shouldn't. So the real question is, what should be done to help mitigate the damage that has taken place?
I think is everybody back?
And you did a good job on the technology.
All right. First time I've ever done that. So there you go.
Good job.
Okay, Commissioner Carlson, anything else?
Nothing else. Thanks a lot.
Okay, Mr. Curtis, thank you very much, and thanks for the video.
All right. Thank you all very much.
And then Chair Light, you have one last person for public comment, Mark Hansen. Mark, I'm going to activate your microphone. If you could take yourself off of mute.
All righty. Little audio test. Hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Bye.
Great. Good evening, commissioners, city staff, and guests. Mark Hansen, King Harbor Boaters. Certainly, I agree with all the comments by the commissioners that it does seem very illogical to move the contaminants from one area of the harbor to the other, rather than move those contaminants offshore where they could be diluted. This is the primary concern that I have fielded from the boating community. They cannot understand why the equipment is here. The city would not invest the incremental increase in costs to move all of the sand out of the harbor. We now have a significant population of stand-up paddle folks who routinely fall in the water. At some point in the future, it would be great to have zero depth entry into the South Turning Basin for our paddlecraft community. A new sports fishing pier could also potentially support increased launching of paddlecraft. During the last waterfront revitalization effort, the Measure C authors and supporters strongly objected to the proposed opening of the lagoon area to the harbor for both paddlecraft and a potential Mother's Beach due to pollution concerns. Those were strong concerns. It would seem best to look forward to cleaning up the water in our harbor and not just stirring up the existing contaminants and condensing those contaminants, particularly at that end of the harbor. I want to take a moment to provide some empathy to the harbor commissioners this evening, because as a community member, I'm in the same position you are, feeling a little potentially insulted that, I've showed up 2 weeks ago. I've talked to a lot of people in the harbor. I'm here tonight. And to feel that it's all a waste of time because the decisions have already made, of course, is concerning. I've been attending Harbor Commission meetings now for 20 years, and I will say we have had an institutional problem. I can remember about 20 years ago, some harbor commissioners saying, why are we here? Why are we even bothering to be here if we're going to hear everything after the fact, after the city council has made decisions? I'll provide one small disagreement with Director Proud. I can recall, as far as the last 5 years, when we were going to put the police maritime unit in, that was not going to go to Harbor Commission. I complained about that, and we arranged to have the police chief come to the Harbor Commission, and he apologized multiple times, and he says, gosh, I'm new to the city and new to this harbor stuff. But yeah, that was one of many I've been involved with over the years. I can remember being in my hotel room in Orlando on a trip and sending a note over to the city council saying, guys, can you not decide this tonight? Please forward this to the Harbor Commission. So over the decades, this has been just an ongoing problem that a lot of harbor business gets decided and then reported to the Harbor Commission. I think tonight, a real good point of this was made when various of the commissioners with expertise in various areas had some really good questions for both the consultant and for the Army Corps, for whom, they very honestly, acknowledge, well, I don't know the answer to that tonight, which shows the huge value why we should talk to our experts on the Harbor Commission before we get this far down the road. The final conclusionary thing I want to say is that I realize we probably, want to try to avoid the embarrassment of having a commission be sending in comments that are in conflict with agreements that the staff has made. But I think it can be done in a polite way. I think the Harbor Commission could write a letter to the Army Corps of Engineers, letting them know that the Harbor Commission will be recommending to their city council that the contracts be altered to place all the sand offshore. And if done in a polite way, it doesn't, we can explain, that we've only got 48 hours. It wasn't time for the Harbor Commission and the city council to mutually resolve this, but we can let them know that, we kind of messed up and we didn't get this to the Harbor Commission in a timely manner. They've got some important expertise things to provide for the city council. And I just don't think it's that big a deal that gentle people can't handle this. And hopefully at the next city council meeting, the city council could take your comments under consideration. And if they agree with you, they can let the Army Corps know, hey, this is just a little tweak, but we're going to spend a little bit more money to make sure we get all the contaminants outside of the harbor. I hope this is helpful. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Mark. I don't see any hands from anybody. So with that, Tom? Okay, there, I see your hand popped up.
Right, sorry about that. Just one quick, thank you, Chairman Light. One quick question. What's the downside to actually taking the material and putting it on the beach just north of Topaz?
So first I'd like to get done with the public comment, and then we can go back into deliberation. Director Proud, is there any more public?
Sorry, I apologize. That was the last public speaker, and I'm just refreshing my screen to see if we have any written comments that have been submitted. And it doesn't look like we have any what we call e-comments that have come in on the website or through the mail system. So I believe that's all the public comment on this item, Chair.
So, thank you. So with that, I'd like to entertain the motion from one of the commissioners to close the public hearing.
So technically, this isn't a noticed public hearing, so you don't have to close the public hearing. You've just concluded public comment on your agendized item. This isn't a formal public hearing. Perfect. I don't know those nuances yet. Yeah, that's good. That's okay.
So with that, I'd like to open it back up to the floor. But before we do that, I'd like to kind of, since I'm the chair, I'd like to kind of put my summary on this. At first, I had concerns on the southern end of the outer placement of the harbor area, the area that was outlined for the outer harbor. I think to the extent that I had concerns there, that's been resolved with the testimony of Mr. Kofer. I don't know how the rest of the commissioners feel. I think I've heard multiple commissioners talk about, let's just, we're generally against dumping in the harbor. For me, it's not just the pollution, we don't know what that would do as far as shoaling internal to the harbor. There's not really been an analysis of that. I think that, the sea bass nursery dates, that should be something we can all come to agreement on. I have a concern. I heard also we're interested in maybe accelerating the maintenance dredge permit. So that's the fourth area. The fifth, I have a concern with the increasing pollution and why. And I don't know what we do about that other than, I don't know. But that's a concern. It shouldn't be getting worse. It should be getting better with all the controls we're putting on things. And I don't know if testing was worse back then or, they've improved in the quality of the testing and the efficacy of the testing. But that's concerning to me because, we should be getting better, not worse. And then the last thing is, I think, we keep hearing best management practices and a whole lot's going to rely on this dredging contract. I would personally like to get to see that before it gets approved by the council. So those are the main areas I kind of boiled up from the conversations we've had. So with that, I'd like to open it up to the commission. I'd like to get to any motions quicker than just, rehashing the issues. So in the interest of time, we're at 9 o'clock. We've been on this quite a while. It's the only issue on our thing. We've spent lots of time on it. So we just ask, folks to look at getting to what we want to do as a commission. So with that, Commissioner Bauer, you had the floor. I apologize for interrupting you there.
No worries. I'm sorry. I kind of went a little too quick. I was just curious, what is the downside to actually taking the material and putting it on the beach north of Topaz? Does it cost more? what is the issue of doing that?
And for the environmental testing side, you'd have to, again, just like the other, adding the other areas, you'd have to go back and collect more samples. You'd have to do a receiver beach transect, which is just a profile of sediment characteristics offshore. It would also require going back to the DMMT again with this additional option for placement, and it would be a timing thing.
You know, I might add, there's a couple other things associated with it. It's the County of LA Beach, so there would have to be permission, obviously, from the County of Los Angeles. And as far as the cost factor, you mentioned, yes, it would be more costly.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Any other questions, Commissioner Bauer?
No, thank you so much.
Or comments? Thank you. Commissioner Kilroy?
Yes, thank you, Chair Light. I guess I'd like to make a motion, to recommend, I think, 3 things moving forward with the contract. That is, first of all, that the contract specify and the permit be amended that all the dredging sediment be transported outside the harbor. That would be one. The second would be, if I get the information correct about when the nursing of the fish takes place, or the sensitive time, that it all happen within the first 6 months of the year. There was one third thing I was thinking of. What was the third thing? I'd be certainly open if someone's got something else they want to add into that.
The small permit, the maintenance.
That was it. Thank you very much. That we try to parallel the maintenance permit or speed up the maintenance permit with this permit in the hopes that both activities can take place at the same time.
So just so I'm clear on your motion, your motion is that we submit a recommendation to council? Did we lose Commissioner Kilroy?
I think we may have lost him again. Oh, there you go. Matt, I think you're back. Did you hear Jim's question?
Yes, I think I did. And I guess my question to you then is, who are we making, or what are we doing? What is our avenue? I mean, are we making this recommendation to you? Are we making it to the council? Are we saying this is what we want to see in the bid?
So I think, listening to the three points you raised, the only one to me that could potentially affect the process is the specifying that all of the dredged material get disposed in the nearshore disposal area. Because, and again, I'll turn to the experts, Kimberly, Ron, and Andy. We have submitted an application that has suggested we are going to put it in 2 different locations. And so the question would be, in order for us to have a contract to say that, we have to have a permit that allows us to do that. And so we would need to have a permit that specifies that we can dispose of all 62,000 cubic yards into the nearshore disposal area, which in my read, and this is where I'm open to any of you telling me something different, would require at least an amended application to remove the in-harbor disposal location from consideration and request that the permit allow all 62,000 cubic yards to be disposed of in the near shore. I don't know if that triggers any additional sampling work or going all the way back to the DMMT and revisiting the issue that far back in the process. So I'll open it up to you to provide your thoughts on that topic. As to the dates of the work, we can certainly specify in that contract, and we would expect that's going to be a permit condition anyway. And the parallel maintenance permit is really our own internal process. It's just figuring out how we might be able to start a supplemental permit process and have them line up with the activities that are currently underway. We're not suggesting we're making any amendment to the existing permit for that to happen. So it really feels like the first issue you raised is the one that would maybe warrant a little bit of discussion. I don't know.
Okay, so
Thoughts?
I guess we're kicking it now to the experts. What potential obstacles does it create by amending our application to have all the dredge material taken out of the harbor?
So from the sediment testing side of things, I think that what would happen is if this comment goes back to the Corps, they might have to go back to the DMMT again, and the DMMT might have to reevaluate the results and make sure that they feel as though all of the sediment can go outside of the harbor. One of the things that we specified in our report and in the permit as well is that the compatibility based on the chemical content of the sediments was more similar. So I don't know that they would have any problems with this proposal, especially given the grain size of the sediment. But that's just one thing that they might evaluate. They might look at that a little more closely, but it would just cause a timing delay.
And I would add that there is a financial implication. You know, this project is being funded by the city, by the Tidelands Fund. We are in a very difficult financial time due to COVID. And, you know, we do have to consider the financial piece of it, at least from my point of view, for the increase in cost. Ron, do you have any idea what the delta would be between, you know, the extra 30,000 or 29,000 yards going out?
Yeah, I asked that question an hour
the contract
ago.
value, or what do you think?
Well, from a contract value, I could estimate that. I haven't. It certainly would add to the construction cost because they're going to have that 29,000, you know, for the round trip cost going back and forth. From the permit stand, well, Kimberly addressed the compatibility issue, and if the DMO is going to, if that's going to be a problem or if that can be dealt with quickly. But then the permit applications that went out, they would obviously have to be amended and go through that process. And I'm sure then there's another public hearing and so forth. So it would obviously delay the project. How much, I don't know, and what the added construction cost, I'm not sure. There would be obviously added cost on our parts just to do all that as well. So there's added costs and time.
Well, so I'm still sticking with that as a recommendation, or however we can push that forward. If it delays that permit a little bit, maybe that's ideal. Maybe that actually allows the maintenance permit to catch up with it. An hour ago, I asked what the delta was in the cost, and so I haven't really heard any number yet. So I have no information to tell me that that's not the way to proceed. I don't know if it's 5% more, 10% more, 50% more. So without that information, I'm going to go ahead and continue with that as a recommendation because it seems to be one of the major issues that's been of concern to not just the commissioners, but other people that have commented with regards to the dredging project. So anyway, I'll stick with that as as my motion to make, like I said, however we're making this recommendation. I guess it's to the city to proceed under those conditions.
So Commissioner Kilroy, my concern with that is we're up against a deadline, and if the city chooses to ignore it, we're past the deadline to comment to the Corps of Engineers.
I think we may have lost Commissioner Kilroy yet again.
Hello?
Hey, there you are. You're back.
I see a yellow box around me. Maybe I just...
Yeah. Unfortunately, we didn't hear anything you may have said in response to Chair Light's question.
Well, I guess what I was saying, I guess I need to speak up in order to get the Zoom to recognize me. I understood what you said, and I guess my answer would be then, why can't we do both? Why can't we pass
You
maybe
dropped out again.
simultaneously.
So you dropped out. I think you said do both simultaneously.
Yes, sir.
That's the motion I would support, but I'm interested. We got other hands up. Do we have I guess the right thing to ask, is there a second? So are you amending your motion to do both simultaneously?
You're asking me? Yes.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, so discussion on the motion, which we've actually already started. So, Commissioner Callahan? If you're speaking, I can't hear you.
You're
I can't hear
muted,
you.
Commissioner Callahan.
Sorry. My concern is, having been out on that beach that we're going to be dredging inside the harbor and seeing the enormous amount of trash that's on it, the broken glass, the cigarette butts, the baby diapers, all kinds of plastic bags and cans. Is there anything we can do to mitigate some of that garbage coming back out?
So I don't know, Ron or someone who might be able to speak to what's the, we talk about, and we've brought it up a couple of times, this concern about debris that, not organic debris, but inorganic debris that may be in the dredged material. And are there ways to screen it? What are the practices that try to mitigate any trash that may be in the material from being transported to the new locations?
Yeah, we'd have to come up with, again, best management practices that would have screening and so forth. We're going to have screening anyway to take out large size sediment, like rock size, because, the dredging is along an area where there's going to be some cobbles and whatnot. That has to be screened out anyway. So, yes, it would just have to be a tight specification to control it.
So Ron, I'm a little confused on that. I thought we were dumping to that outside the harbor site.
That's correct, but we don't want to be dumping the large size, cobbles in
okay. I misunderstood the report then. Okay,
yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'm not concerned about rocks. I'm concerned about plastics and things that don't disintegrate.
Yeah.
Well, at the same time, that's what I was mentioning. They would have to be screened out.
Okay. Well, that's my big concern.
So is there something you would ask Matt to amend his motion, or?
No, if it's already going to be done, there's no reason to put it in the motion. If it hasn't been considered, then we need some kind of a screening process for when they're dumping the debris, the tailings, to screen out some of that plastic. The plastic, the cans, the bottles.
We've already discussed it in our project description, so it will definitely be addressed in the plan and specifications before it goes out for bid.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Carlson.
Thank you. I've been struggling for days to figure out what we might write here, what we might do here. I agree with Commissioner Kilroy's motion. We should do this project. We should figure out the right way to do it. I have too many questions about dumping it inside the harbor, so I tend to agree with just going outside, unless we answer those questions, which will probably take as long or longer. I still have the concerns about trashing on the outside the harbor, so I think that I have ways of resolving them, which I'd like to add as a friendly amendment, and I think they would all be internal to the city and to the contract. I would recommend that the contractor who eventually does this allow observers on, and we, this commission, get to pick the observers. I would ask the contractor to define in his response to our proposal how he's going to handle trash. And I would hope that we get to review that contract when, or that proposal when it comes back to us. I specifically, what I really want to know is what this contractor is going to do differently than the Marina Del Rey guys did, because I'm sure they did best practices too. And, you know, we've heard how that went. So that's all I've got. So it's a friendly amendment, but I think it's internal to us and not something that would go to the Army.
So I heard observers, this is all for the city, that there be observers and that the commission picks the observers. In the RFP, the response has to include how the contractor would handle trash. And then what was your third one?
My third one was that we actually get to review the response from the contractor. Like, you know, I don't want some contractor to go, I'm going to use best practices. And then, you know, we never get to read that or see it or, you know, review the contract.
So I'll just interject here, if I may, Commissioner Light. Just the way the contract is written, it'll be a low bid contract. We'll be obligated to award the contract to the low bidder or not award it at all. So we will have to write into the specifications the requirements that for best management practices, which will include the screening that we've been discussing. So it's not the kind of contract that we can evaluate and pick and choose between who's got the best proposal. This will be a low bid contract.
So what do you recommend we do to keep trash out of the ocean?
Well, that's what I'm saying, that we put into the specifications the requirements to whatever the best management practices are to keep that from happening or reduce it as much as possible. And then we hire inspectors, paid inspectors who are trained in what to look for to monitor the process. And if something goes wrong, that they stop the process until it gets corrected.
Now, I might add on to, because I completely agree with what Andy said, but normally all these projects, the city in this case would have somebody performing construction management services. And in that, the contractor would have to submit everything that's required to be submitted in the project specifications, and it would have to be approved before he even had the acceptance to go forward. So as far as how the trash would be handled and so forth, that would be in the specifications, but he would have to submit his whole plan for approval. So it wouldn't be a case of him deciding, it'd be a case of us having the criteria in the specification and then the construction management, whoever's doing that, reviewing and approving or disapproving or kicking back that submittal. And also at the same time, like Andy said, they are the ones that would have inspector on the dredge for a couple of reasons. One for that, and also you have to monitor the quantity of dredge for payment of dredge material. So normally, in the cases where we've done construction management on dredging projects, we have somebody that's on the dredge, the contractor knows that. He has to accommodate that person. You can't just put any observer out there because it'd be a liability issue and so forth. So it's handled through the construction management people.
The last time those people were here, they did not do an adequate job. I don't trust them.
Well, I don't know.
What recourse do I have? How do I improve on their process?
I don't know that you can lump all contractors into that particular. I don't know who it was. I don't know what happened. Certainly the Corps, it was the Corps' project. The Corps is the one learning the lessons and providing permit requirements for us. I don't suspect they're happy with what happened there either. And so they're in the perfect position to require us to do what needs to be done to not let it happen again. As Ron mentioned, we hire a construction management firm or inspection firm to be on board and watching every scoop. That's the best we can do.
So I have a question, why we're going low cost instead of, there's all sorts of there's best value, there's low price technically acceptable.
No, in Public Works, state law requires us to do a low bid contract. Or else
there's no way to
build. Our charter does allow us to do a design build, but we're already in design, and the firm that we've hired, Ron's firm, does not do the construction work itself. So some of those other options that are available in the private sector are not available to us.
Why do it in the federal sector? It's not.
I'm sorry. Okay.
So it's really important that we have the specifications detailed in the bid to make sure we're getting exactly what we want. Because in the specifications, then you just leave it to the contractor to do the minimal amount, which is why specifying best management practices is a little nebulous. I think what we're looking for, if I can butt in here, is a little bit more specificity with regards to how trash is going to be removed from the dredging material. Yeah, I understand we're going to screen for rocks. I understand, we find a milk bottle, it's going to come out with the screened rocks, but that doesn't address cigarette butts or smaller debris. And I don't know that we can address every bit of trash that might be dredged up. But the point is, when you talk about specifications, we need some examples of exactly what is going to be specified with regards to trash removal from the dredged material.
Yeah, and that's, it's not just a matter of saying best management practices. It's things like that are itemized, exactly what criteria that has to be met.
Okay.
Can we get some examples of that? I don't think I'm coming through all the way. It was, I would like to see some examples of what wording we're going to put in the contract.
Well, on this one, yeah, there's examples, but I think it's better to pass through the draft version of it for this project.
So I think that Matt gets to your motion, is that we should ask to see, and I think it addresses. I'd ask that Commissioner Carlson had the floor. I think some of those responses may change your request, but I think it speaks to what we'd ask of the commission. And maybe we need to split this out. One action, one motion for the what goes to the Corps of Engineers and what goes to the council, because we're going to have to bifurcate the two anyway in the motion itself. So, Commissioner Carlson, based on what you just heard, you had 3 items. Would you amend that?
Well, I'm at a loss now. I'm told I can't have observers. I'm told probably the best place to put this is in the request for proposal we send out. This also probably doesn't go to the Army, so there may not be, deadline pressure to write this tonight. So I withdraw my friendly amendment. But Director Proud, I will say that I'm not just being, some tree hugger. Like, the beach and not trashing it is important for the economic health of this city. And, that trash did end up on the beach before. It will end up on the beach again. And this isn't just, a nice dive site that 1 or 2 people go to. If you go down there on any Wednesday night before COVID, especially in the summertime, the parking lot would have 50 divers in it. Every weekend, Saturday and Sunday, there's a bunch of divers in it. Dive and Surf uses that for classes all the time. So, this isn't out of sight, out of mind. This is very much part of the city and part of the city's economic future. So I appreciate, that we're trying to get a low cost, low bid contract, but we really don't want to fill the ocean with trash right at our doorstep, just south of the pier at Veterans Park, any time of year. So no comment. I withdraw my comment.
Okay, Commissioner Walters, I think you're next.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It does seem to me it makes some sense to bifurcate the letter or comment letter to the Army Corps versus the City Council. On the Army Corps letter, I did have a couple questions maybe for Ron. Let's just say if the Harbor Commission did prepare a comment letter that went to the Army Corps, and that letter commented that, the proposed percentage 50-50 half of it going to the in-harbor placement and the other half going to the outer harbor, is okay, but we would recommend, we would request that 100%, or at least we have the flexibility to have 100% go to the outer harbor placement area. Is that something the Army Corps could not just accept as a comment, but could they take action on their own and issue the permit with that flexibility? What's stopping the Army Corps from accepting that comment and taking action to issue a permit that allows you that flexibility? And then our letter, which went to the council, if that flexibility is granted, our recommendation to the city council would be to move the dredge material outside. So I think Ron's the right one to answer that question.
Well, I don't know if I could answer how the Corps might react on that. They might field the comment and then
ignore it.
They could say, well, the project description is not set up that way. Therefore, if the applicant wishes to modify that and resubmit, I'm not sure how they do that. I haven't seen that happen before, so.
I do think that they would have to go back to the DMMT because dredging is regulated by the DMMT as almost like a governing body of a pool of regulatory agencies, so that they all have the chance to provide review and comment on these reports and proposals, because they, like you, want to be stewards of the environment, want to make sure it's the best option, so on and so forth. So I think that if this comment comes back because our SAP is approved as it is with the disposal proposed as it is, they would have to re-engage the DMMT to approve this alternative placement option.
I see. Yeah, which was actually goes to my second part of my question. That the DMMT, they're not a regulatory agency per se, but they act like one, right? They have some influence over the agencies, correct?
Yeah.
They don't issue a permit.
No,
you have to go through them on a dredging project, but they don't have the authority to issue a permit, but they certainly have the authority to disapprove of the project. But the regulatory agencies are the ones that would issue the permit, which are, in this case, the Corps of Engineers oversees the DMO, so, but you have to go back through the Corps for a regulatory permit.
Right, so it sounds to me that we could send a letter to Army Corps, but probably, very likely, they would ignore it. Or
the alternative is to do nothing and ask the city to.
No, I'm not proposing we do nothing. I'm just trying to understand the consequences. So, Ron, what else could they do? They obviously could ignore it. Could they send that comment back to the applicant, which would be the city or you, or the DMMT? For their comment?
They wouldn't send it back to the DMO. They could send it back to the applicant, yes.
Would they send it back to DMMT, or would that be your responsibility as the applicant?
No, that would be our responsibility. They wouldn't send it back there. That would be, they could send it back and say, we require you to go back through them because there's a change in the scope.
Okay, but they would not perceive our comment letter as a change in scope. It would have to come from the city, although, because the Harbor Commission is not the applicant here.
Right, the city's the applicant.
Correct, okay. Okay, so in terms of the process, it sounds to me that, so the Army Corps could ignore the letter and just move on without it. The Army Corps could refer it back to the applicant, which would be the city, or in our case, the applicant's consultant, which is you, Ron, right?
Correct.
Those are really the only two options that they would do with that letter.
I would say yes, that's probably true.
Okay. And I don't know if you're a betting man, but which one will you bet they would do?
It's hard to say. I always hate to second guess the regulatory bodies.
Is it okay if I chime in? I actually, the way that the public review process works is that the Army Corps can't really ignore the public comments. to my understanding. So they would have to address it in some way. It's just the pathway that they would choose. And my gut feeling is that they would take it back to all of the agencies to reconsider the disposal options.
And when you say all agencies, you're talking about the Water Quality Board, the DMMT,
The EPA. I think primarily the
Region 9 as
EPA
well?
would be one they'd want to buy in. Yeah.
Region 9 as well? Okay.
Mhm.
Well, that's if it goes back through the DDMO process, because that's the only, the only regulatory agencies that we've applied for actual permits are the Corps of Engineers and the Water Board.
Okay. And that delay is how long if they decide to go back or the city decide to do so voluntarily, correct? I mean, we can voluntarily submit an amendment if the city council instructed you to do that, right? And by the way, you guys are all operating under some resolution from the city council, right? Is that Steve?
Well, we're operating, so to go all the way back to when I started the presentation. So this is a project that was approved by the city council on the capital improvement plan. And so we don't have to go back to the city council to initiate work on the project. How they approve things are in various steps. So when we go hire a professional services contract to do the design work, that's a city council approval. When we go back to hire a consultant to actually do the implementation of the dredging work, that will go back to the city council for their approval. So we're not the resolution we're operating under is the resolution for which the capital improvement plan was approved by the city council and continues to be renewed on a year-by-year basis.
Okay.
So it is one project within a broader 5-year capital improvement plan that we are working on.
Okay. And I guess back to Ron. So if we were to amend it voluntarily, what does that delay look like? We're gonna have to go back through the DMMT process, right? Are we talking 2 months, 3 months, 6 months? What are we talking here?
Well, just going back through the DDMO process could be,
It could be relatively fast.
What's that?
I'm
2
sorry to
months,
interrupt.
and then, well, let me finish, and then you can tell me what you think, okay? I would say when it's all said and done, it could be 2 months there. And then but the main thing is we have to go back and amend the project description and the permit applications, because those were actually applications submitted to agencies. So we'd have to resubmit an amended application to the 2 agencies that we've submitted it to.
Right. And as I recall, this project was exempt from CEQA, so you're not having to amend a CEQA document approval either, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. I think that's all I had, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Matt, you have your hand up?
Sorry, I don't think I ever put it down. But since you recognize me, after listening to all this and thinking about what the timeline is likely to be, I don't think dredging could get started until 2022 anyway, after January of 2022. If we're saying that we don't want to do dredging and dumping of this material after July 1st, be hard pressed to see how we would get all our permits in a row right now. If we did absolutely nothing and let the train keep going, is someone here telling me that we would get our permits, specifications written, bids approved, council approved the bids, and dredging started and finished before July 2021? Thank you, Andrew. Andrew's shaking his head no. So if that's a no, 2 months additional time to amend our application to get permission to dump all the dredge material outside the harbor doesn't seem to really impact when we would start this whole process anyway. I guess, Chair Light, And after listening to the answers from Commissioner Walters' questions, making comments to the Army Corps at this point may not be very fruitful. I would suggest just going forward with directing staff, I guess. I mean, we're not the council. Staff can ignore us. But whatever language we can to direct staff to amend the permit to allow the dumping of the dredge material outside the harbor. I would throw in there from Commissioner Carlson's the desire to be able to review the specifications of how trash is going to be removed.
I think we lost you again.
Addressed in that regards. I mean, I understand that it's not up to us to pick who gets the bid. I understand it's low bid and all that. So the only chance of us having an impact on that really is how the specifications are written. And lastly, again, to ask staff to fast track the maintenance permitting process in the hopes that it catches up with this permitting, and so that the smaller dredged areas can happen at the same time. But really, we're asking staff to do that.
Yeah, so we're getting along. It's 9:50. So what is your motion?
So my motion is, and Director Proud, you can tell me if I'm out of order, but my motion would be to direct staff to amend the permit to allow the dumping of the dredging material outside the harbor, that the specifications for trash removal on the RFP be presented to the Harbor Commission, that the maintenance dredging permit be fast-tracked or accelerated in the hopes that it catches up with this permit. And those are the three things I think that we could have an impact on that would address most of the concerns I think that have been addressed, that have been commented on. So that's my motion.
So I don't think we can direct staff, but I'll let.
I know. So that's why I said Director Proud, if I'm out of line, I don't know how to word that properly.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, and I agree. I mean, we take direction from the council. They set the policy, but I'm pausing because I'm struggling myself. I'm trying to figure out, you know, we would have to, there would certainly have to be an internal conversation that we need to have regarding what the implications of this are and who would be the entity that, you know, whether we go to council with this as a, I mean, as Andy pointed out, you know, changing the strategy now does have cost implications, which has CIP implications. We don't know exactly how much those are, but we do know, I mean, everybody said it's going to be more. It's just we don't know how much more sitting here tonight. So, you know, we're by taking this action, we're really requesting that the city council agree to spend additional dollars to have all of the material disposed of in the offshore disposal area, or the nearshore disposal area. I'm not sure what the process would be for us to have that conversation and then have that, how that then manifests itself in the conversation with the Army Corps. Andy, I don't want to put you on the spot. I don't know if you have any thoughts on process. I mean, it kind of feels like there's maybe a council conversation, but I'm not certain about that.
I think we just need to talk internally with you know, the city manager and my boss, public works director, and decide which way to go here on that. I mean, there are cost implications of rework. Some of these things that are being suggested are rework. There's cost implications in the contract, but there's also my staff, you know, reworking, doing things over again, and not getting to other projects that are also priorities for the council. So those are all things that we'd have to consider. And I'd want to do that under the council of public works director and city manager, et cetera.
Yeah, agreed.
So the clock is ticking on us. I'd like to make a substitute motion. I'd like the commission to consider a substitute motion. I'd like to form a subcommittee of 3 to 1, write a letter reflecting the commission's concerns to the Corps of Engineers, and 2, to write a letter to the council reflecting the commission's concerns and some recommendations. I see that as the only way to protect our interests, because if we don't have time to wait to hear what staff comes back with or what the council does. And so this is our one shot. That's why we had a special meeting to get something to the Corps of Engineers. We can't count on the internal city process. So I'm putting that forward as a substitute motion. Can I get a second on that?
Second, but I'd like one other question. Where does all this fit in with repairing the break wall? It seems rather silly to dredge the inside of the harbor if we have holes on the outside of the break wall letting more in. It's kind of like sticking your finger in a hole and hoping more stuff doesn't come in.
We're continuing, we have never stopped talking with the Army Corps of Engineers about, the timing and getting their project moving forward. We had to make a decision as to whether we were going to wait and try to coordinate those two together or to just move forward. Given the uncertainty of the timing of their project moving forward and the continuing building up of the shoaling materials in the harbor, we elected to move forward with the process now rather than wait. It could be 5-10 years before the Army gets to doing the breakwater. We just don't know what that timing is. And so consequently, having heard the concerns expressed by members of this commission as well as others, that, the situation is getting to the point where something needs to be done regarding dredging, we've decided to move forward with that, and the council approved that as part of the capital improvement plan. It may not be optimal if the breakwater isn't in its perfect condition and it's, perhaps preventing a little more material coming through it than it otherwise would. But, for us to wait just means we're putting off, a challenging problem even longer.
Thank you.
My understanding of the breakwall construction, Ron, help me here. It is a porous build, right? There's no core in this breakwall. It's meant to be porous.
It is porous, and of course that's why it's had some damage over the years, and probably more so on the outer side.
Right, but there's no. You mentioned earlier you have no concern about the stability of the breakwall if we remove sediment.
Not from the dredging we're proposing, correct?
So the two are independent in some sense. We could do one project without the other. There's no loss of work. There's no wasted work by doing one if the breakwall takes 5 years instead of 2 years, for instance.
Well, there's some rather large holes in the outside of the break wall.
I've seen them. Oh yeah, I understand.
Okay.
And that's what the Corps needs to address, but no, that's correct. They're independent from that standpoint.
Yeah, but that's the point. Shouldn't we fill in the holes before we dredge so that we can slow the spread? But I don't think we're going to fix anything there tonight, Vicki. So, are we okay to move on? Did we lose Vicki? I think we did.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm done. Thank you.
So I think are there. So I got a whole bunch of, I can't tell who just raised their hand and who had their, so Roger, do you have
I'll lower my hand.
Roger?
Thanks. I have a question on your motion regarding writing a letter to, or writing comments to the Army Corps. How would that work? They're due tomorrow.
I believe they're due actually Thursday.
It's unclear. The period of comment is September 29th through October 29th, and there's no time or time zone. So right. Does through include the 29th?
That's how I read the notice, but usually when we publish a notice and we have comments through a date, it's usually close of business that day.
I would assume so too, but my question stands. we can't review if we write a letter, we can't review it at the next meeting.
No, I'm saying authorize, my motion is to authorize the subcommittee to submit.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so I'd like to, I don't see any hands up. I'd like to call a vote on this. I think the proper thing is the substitute motion first. Is that right, Director Proud?
I believe that's the way we do it.
Okay, so I'd like to call the vote, and I'd like it to be a roll call vote.
So this is a vote on the motion that was made by Chair Light, seconded by, I believe it was
Commissioner Callahan.
And again, I'll take you in the order you appear on the screen. You've moved since I did this last time. Commissioner Carlson.
Hey, can you clarify the motion, Steve?
So, Jim, do you want to repeat the motion?
Yeah, the motion is to form a subcommittee who will draft and submit 2 letters, one to the Corps of Engineers and one to the City Council that embodies the discussions and concerns that the commission has. And I know that's putting trust in folks. We could potentially, I'd entertain a friendly motion to review the one going to council, but the one going to the Corps, we're up against the deadline.
Well, I don't know if it's too late to offer a friendly amendment. As long as,
yes,
can we include the items that Commissioner Kilroy had mentioned? I think, Matt, you had mentioned 3 things to be addressed, right?
Yeah, and my concern, of course, is by having a commission, subcommittee, all we're doing is creating more. We're crunching the time. I mean, to me, we don't have the time. Yeah, there were 3 things. Amend the permit to move the stuff outside, accelerate, and most of them don't have to do.
I lost Kilroy.
Yeah, I think just to clarify, Jim, I think the contents of the letter to the Army Corps just relates to the permit condition, which is we want flexibility to move all the dredge material, correct, out to the near shore area.
Yes, and to reflect the nursery.
I think we could agree right now to send a letter to the Corps and to the City Council making that recommendation.
Yeah, I don't think we can draft it tonight, and it's up to you. If you want to, so you can vote down my motion. I think we'll be more efficient and effective if a couple of us go off and write it. Then
I have no problem with you going off and writing it.
Author it through Stephen, Director Proud tonight, and we're already at 10.
Yeah, I was okay with the motion, Jim. I was just wanting to make sure what the content of each of those letters would be. The Army Corps is just going to address the permit.
Yeah, the permit and my thoughts on and I don't want to make this part of the motion, but my thoughts on the one to the council was number 1, that we would like to see the dredging contract come back, and that we'd like them to actually rescind their application and rewrite it, so that it is dumping it all off, outside the harbor.
Right. Okay.
So therein lies my issue with the motion and giving a subcommittee carte blanche. To me, it's not rescinding the permit and rewriting it. It's amending the permit.
Well,
now, I don't know. Maybe to the Army Corps it's the same thing, but to me, it's a huge difference between the 2.
So I called the vote. We can vote it up or down. You guys can vote it down. I'd just like to get to some decision here tonight. So I'm calling the vote on it as is to form a subcommittee, and we'll pick the subcommittee afterwards. And Matt, you can be on it. I don't care. So can we do the roll call vote, and you guys can vote it down if you think I'm pushing too hard.
Okay, so everyone's clear on the motion. That's up for consideration. I'll take the roll call vote. So I don't know if you voted already, Commissioner Carlson. I'm going to start there. Commissioner Carlson.
I appreciate the clarification that Commissioner Welters put in. I vote yes.
Commissioner Bauer.
I also vote yes.
Commissioner Krazan.
Vote yes.
Commissioner Walters.
Yes.
Commissioner Kilroy.
I'm going to vote yes, but I sure hope we can do it at the conclusion of this.
Commissioner Callahan.
Yes.
Chair Light.
Yes.
Okay, so that motion passes.
Okay, so this, I don't know if I need a motion to form who's on the subcommittee?
I think it would be advisable to maybe make a motion, or, you could have a little discussion, see how it goes together, but it would be nice to have it in the record so there's no, it's very clear that the Harbor Commission voted on the members of the actual subcommittee. I think that would be nice to have that clarification.
Okay.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but point of order, since we just had a vote, should we have had public comment on that?
Oh, you should have. I apologize.
I'm not sure if we had.
Actually, I take that back. So this was all part of the same agenda item.
Yeah, it's not here.
Still on, we're still on the very same item. So we've
Sorry to interrupt.
Comment on the item. Yeah, no, so we're good. Thank you.
So I didn't entertain who.
So I'll make a motion that we form a subcommittee. Well, I guess you already did that. For nominations to the subcommittee.
I nominate Jim Light, chairman.
I'll nominate myself. If that's allowed.
We can have up to one more.
If there's no volunteers, I'll nominate Roger Carlson.
Yeah, me too.
I'm happy to volunteer. COVID laid me off, so I got the time.
Okay. So I appreciate I will be on the subcommittee, but I think Roger, I would prefer Roger chair.
Okay.
Well, I don't nominate to be chair.
That's fine with me.
Are you okay with that, Roger?
I accept this great honor.
Okay. So, can we put that to a vote? Can we
need a second?
Second.
Okay, so if I understand the motion correctly, the motion is to nominate members of the Harbor Commission to a subcommittee the members who've been nominated for the subcommittee are Chair Light, Commissioner Kilroy. Well, I'm sorry, your title, Chair.
Yeah.
Commissioner, I can do it this way. Commissioner Kilroy and Commissioner Carlson, with Commissioner Carlson serving as the chair of that subcommittee.
Yeah.
So on that motion, Commissioner Carlson?
I vote yes, unless it's more kosher for me to abstain.
I think you can vote. I vote
yes.
You vote.
Yeah. Commissioner Bauer?
Yes.
Commissioner Kazan?
Yes.
Commissioner Walters?
Yes.
Commissioner Kilroy?
Yes.
Commissioner Callahan?
Yes. Chair
Light?
Yes.
Okay, that motion passes as well.
So what I'd like commissioners to do, that's probably Brown Act violation. So I think we take what we got, and Roger, if you don't mind starting the first draft, and I would prioritize the one that's most time constrained, which is the Corps of Engineers.
Will do.
Okay.
Yeah, and Chair Light, I would caution you, I think you were about to go there, but maybe it's worth explicitly stating that, this is a letter that can only be shared among the 3 members of the subcommittee. If it were to go to other members of the Harbor Commission, we would be violating the Brown Act. So the original motion was structured that way, that the rest of the commission was entrusting the subcommittee to draft and send. So subcommittee members, just if you're in the process of communicating with one another, just don't please accidentally send it to your fellow commissioners who aren't on the subcommittee. So
we can bring it back as a blue folder, or as a referral to staff, whatever. Not a referral to staff, but a
informational item.
Yeah.
I mean, we can certainly bring it back at some point and share it with the rest of the commission, but
I think it should be in the public record, and the commissioners have a chance to chastise us if we screwed it up.
Okay. Okay, now I don't have your.
Okay, I think we beat that one to death, so I'd like to close that one, and unless there's any final comments. You okay with that, Director Proud?
Yeah, I think I'm fine with that. I've long ago lost which one of my tabs has our agenda on it. So if you still have that in front of you.
Got it. So the next item is the member items and referrals to staff. I'm going to reserve mine for the next meeting based on what we put in these letters. So, Commissioner Bauer, any referrals to staff?
None from me.
Oh, before we get into that, the city staff and Ron and Kimbry really appreciate your time. I think we're done with you. You did a great job responding to, at times, and I apologize, we were a hostile audience. I think that's because we were caught by surprise and we don't like the deadlines, the tight deadlines. So nothing personal against you guys. It's obviously, we care a lot about this. So I appreciate your honest and open input to us and feedback. And Kimbry, I like that picture behind you. So thank you very much, and I hope you don't take anything personal there. We just are very passionate about this.
Not at all. Not at all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ron and Kimbry.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Geraldine.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. So I apologize once again. I jumped on you, Commissioner Bauer. So any referrals to staff?
None from me. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Walters.
Nope.
Commissioner Callahan.
I have two. And I understand that we're not having a November 9th meeting, so this will go to the December, is it the 14th meeting?
Correct. December 14th. That's correct.
Okay. The first one is I would like to agendize a discussion about the homeless encampment to be placed in Moonstone Park.
No, hold on, Vicki. They voted against that. It's going to go up behind.
No, the second phase is going in Moonstone.
Oh, what?
Yeah.
Actually, there's a discussion on city council this week to put it at C-Lab. I apologize for being out of order.
Okay, thank you for clarification.
Geez, I didn't
the second phase was supposed to go in at Moonstone, but if we could agendize that, because wherever it's going to be in the Tidelands, and I want to know what the fiscal impact's going to be.
So I'm not certain I can agendize that for you. So this is an item that is...
Really?
Yeah, I can't. This is an item that's been sitting at council. They haven't requested your input on this item. And so I don't know under what authority I'd bring it to you to solicit your input for that. I don't...
Even though it's going to be all the maintenance and upkeep and all that's going to be out of the Tidelands?
No, that's not at all what's going to happen. The project that it's proposed is not using funding from the uplands or the Tidelands, because the project is initially being proposed to be located at, street name just went out of my...
Kingsdale.
Thank you, Kingsdale. Just went out of my...
But the second phase will be in the Tidelands.
Yes, but it's not a Tidelands or uplands project, and so it's not taking funding from those locations.
Even the police enforcement?
Well, I mean, the police enforcement is police enforcement across the city. I can't get into a long discussion about it, but I honestly have to say this is not a subject matter that unless the city council asks for your input. They've already decided this item. Roger is correct. They are agendizing, I believe it's after their strategic plan discussion. There is an agenda item to discuss the C-Lab location as the possible second location, but they're going to give direction. The question for them at that meeting is do they want staff to explore that as a location? If they don't ask for your thoughts or recommendations, I'm not sure under what authority I would bring that to you for consideration. It's not a project our office is working on. It's not a project I have any particular knowledge of. I don't know how I would do that. So
sounds like we have to individually go to the council or to that meeting. And
well, I was going to just as a reminder, I did send you all your letter to the strategic plan meeting. I was going to remind everyone that meeting is happening on Thursday. So if one or some of you want to attend that meeting, you're certainly welcome to, and that agenda item will be on there. So, but that item, absent kind of this 11th hour agenda item, it had already been discussed by the city council and decided upon. So I'm not sure why it would have ever come back to the Harbor Commission unless they asked for your opinion.
Okay. And the second one is I got something that asked me to see if we could agendize protocols for private recreational boating. That was forwarded to the Board of Supervisors, and those protocols would reopen private recreational boating to non-household guests.
So that's COVID rules or?
Yeah, COVID rules.
Yeah, I can't speak to that because I just got it from Mark in the middle of this meeting. So when he sends me something at 6:30 and we're in the middle of a meeting, I have no familiarity with the subject matter. I can't even tell you what it's about. I don't know.
Come on.
You know? I'm not picking on you, Mark. I know you can still hear me, Mark. I know you're here, but I'm not that fast. I can't get it at 6:39 and tell you whether it needs to be agendized for your consideration or not. I can certainly look at it, and if it seems like something we should bring to you, we're happy to do that. But I know zero about this at this point.
All right.
So I'm happy to what I could offer you, Commissioner Callahan, is I can offer to read Mark's email and what he submitted to you, and maybe I can even talk with the chair and the vice chair to see if they'd like to put it on the agenda for December. I can offer that to you.
Okay.
How's that?
Fair enough.
All right.
Okay, anything else, Vicky? I'm taking that as a no. Commissioner Carlson?
Since it's my turn to speak, I'll just say that COVID item may best belong at the Emergency Council, where we do have harbor representation. And they make the COVID rules in town. Nothing. I guess the only other thing I'd submit would be on the homeless shelters going somewhere around Moonstone Park. Hey, that's right at the intersection at Harbor Drive and Yacht Club Way. Let's fix that intersection. That's it. Thanks.
Did I miss anybody?
Yes, me.
Oh, Commissioner Kilroy. Sorry, people.
That's all right. I don't have anything. Except I'm not sure when the subcommittee is getting together. Can we have a closure of this meeting and 3 of us just stay on? Or is that too Brown Act funny?
The only challenge is I would also have to stay on just because I'm the host of the meeting. So it might be worth your while to maybe let this meeting entirely close and see if you can connect through either a separate Zoom meeting that one of you could schedule, or if you want to, if you're thinking about doing it tonight, if you're thinking about doing it tomorrow, it doesn't matter. But
okay, that's almost my only question.
Given a 5-minute break, I can schedule a Zoom meeting right after this.
Yeah, that's probably easy enough to do. I would do it that way.
Okay, did I miss anybody on referrals to staff?
Oh, you skipped me, but I don't have any.
I'm sorry. People keep jumping around on my screen, so it doesn't stay in an order. So, sorry. Anything, Commissioner Krazan?
It's Krazan and no.
Krazan. Sorry. Too many consonants.
I know.
But I got the vowel wrong. Okay. With that, let's see. I guess we adjourn to the next meeting. So.
Right, and I believe your agenda may say the November meeting, but in fact, the next meeting would be you're adjourning to your regularly scheduled meeting on December 14th.
So moved.
Second.
So that's my motion.
Second.
Second.
Anybody opposed? We don't need to do a roll call. Okay, nobody's opposed, so I think we're adjourned. Thank you.
All right, thank you all.
Sticking out this